The first light breaks across the savanna in long ribbons of amber and gold, spreading slowly over endless grassland that ripples like water under the morning breeze. From high above, the land appears as a patchwork of shadow and emerging colour, darker greens where acacia trees cluster near hidden streams, pale gold where the grass grows tall and untouched, and deep brown along the ancient pathways worn smooth by countless hooves and feet over generations. Mist gathers in the low places, soft and white, filling the valleys between gentle rises in the earth, and through this quiet veil, shadows begin to move. These are not small shadows. They shift with deliberate weight, grey forms emerging from the pale morning fog like islands appearing as tide recedes. The shapes resolve slowly as the light strengthens, rounded backs, thick legs, trunks hanging relaxed toward the ground, ears spread wide as sails to catch the cool air before the day's heat arrives. This is a herd of elephants, and they are waking. There is no sudden movement here, no alarm or urgency. The elephants wake the way the savanna itself wakes, gradually, with small adjustments and stirrings, as if the entire landscape is drawing a single long breath. A calf, no taller than a tall man's chest, leans against its mother's front leg, trunk curled inward against its face. An adolescent female stretches her back leg behind her, then rocks forward, testing her weight. The matriarch, the oldest and largest female in the group, stands already alert, her trunk lifted slightly as she samples the morning air, reading it for messages of weather, water and distant herds. She's perhaps 50 years old, possibly older. Her skin hangs in deep folds at her shoulders and haunches, and the tips of her tusks are worn smooth from decades of stripping bark and digging for roots. Her ears are tattered at the edges, marked by old encounters with thorns and branches. But her eyes are clear, and when she moves, the others watch. She carries within her mind a map built from half a century of walking these lands, the location of every reliable waterhole, the routes that avoid steep ravines and human settlements, the places where good browse appears after the rains, and the spots where, in the worst droughts, water can still be found if one knows where to dig. Around her, the herd arranges itself with practiced ease. There are 3 other adult females, each with their own young. The oldest of these walks close to the matriarch's shoulder, perhaps her own daughter, now in her 30s, with twin calves from recent seasons staying close to her flanks. 2 younger adult females position themselves slightly behind, each shepherding adolescents and smaller calves who dart briefly away to touch trunks or bump against one another in greeting before returning to their mother's sides. The very youngest calf, born perhaps only weeks ago, stays pressed against its mother's belly, legs still uncertain, eyes wide, curious. In total, there are 14 elephants in this family group, ranging from the ancient matriarch to the newest infant, and they move now with shared purpose as the sun climbs higher and the mist begins to thin. The matriarch takes the first step, a deliberate placement of her left front foot that makes almost no sound despite her tremendous weight. She has made this decision as she makes it most mornings. It is time to walk. The path they follow is not marked on any human map, but it is written clearly in the earth itself. Here the grass grows shorter, trampled by years of passing feet. Here the soil is packed harder, compressed by weight and repetition, until it becomes almost like stone. The route curves around a termite mound taller than a man, passes between 2 flat-topped acacias that frame the way like pillars, and heads north-northwest toward a line of hills barely visible in the distance. This is a path the matriarch's mother walked, and her grandmother before that, and back through generations to a time when the grasslands looked different, and the rains came in different months, but the essential shape of the land remained. The herd moves in loose formation, never quite a line, never quite a cluster. The matriarch leads, with the older females spread to her sides and slightly behind, creating a moving perimeter around the younger animals. The adolescents walk with their own mixture of focus and distraction, sometimes maintaining their position, sometimes veering off to investigate a particularly interesting tree or patch of ground before trotting to catch up. The calves stay in the centre, surrounded, protected by the bulk and experience of their elders. As they walk, the morning light strengthens, and the colours of the savanna grow more distinct. The grass is not simply gold, but 100 shades of it. Pale yellow where it grows in sandy soil, deeper amber where moisture lingers, nearly green at the base near roots that tap underground reserves. The scattered trees stand dark against the bright grass, their canopies like hovering clouds. Birds rise in startled groups as the herd approaches, wheeling away in perfect synchronization before settling again after the giants pass. A family of warthogs trot sideways with tails held high like radio antennas, giving the elephants a wide berth and watching with suspicious attention. The matriarch pauses, lifts her trunk high, and draws in a long breath through the twin fingers at its tip. Her trunk is a marvel of evolution, containing no bones but operated by more than 40,000 individual muscles, working in concert to create an organ that can lift a tree trunk or pick up a single seed with equal precision. She turns her head slightly, trunk still raised, reading the air as a sailor reads the sky. Water lies in that direction, perhaps 8 kilometers away, but the wind carries its scent clearly to her. The particular smell of standing water mixed with mud and the mineral tang of minerals dissolved from underground. She lowers her trunk and continues walking. The others follow without question, each stepping almost exactly where the one ahead has stepped, creating not 14 separate paths, but a single deep trail. Young elephants, still learning navigation, step directly in the prints left by adults. A calf of perhaps 3 years old, still dependent on its mother's milk but beginning to experiment with solid food, places each foot carefully in the enormous depression left by the matriarch's foot, like a child playing a game of giant steps. The print is larger than the calf's entire foot, deep enough that the calf's leg sinks in up to the ankle joint. Behind the calf, its mother walks with her own trunk, occasionally reaching forward to rest gently on her offspring's back, a constant tactile reassurance. I am here. You are safe. Keep walking. This is how memory transfers in elephant society, not through language, but through experience repeated until it becomes instinct. The young walk behind the old, watch what they eat, learn which plants bring relief from parasites and which cause stomach upset, memorize the locations of shade trees and water sources and places where the ground turns unexpectedly soft. By the time these calves are themselves adults with young of their own, they will carry the same internal map that guides the matriarch now, with small updates and modifications added by their own experience, but built on a foundation laid over lifetimes. The sun climbs higher and the air grows warmer. Heat begins to shimmer in visible waves above the grass, distorting distant objects so that trees appear to float and the horizon becomes uncertain. The herd's pace remains steady, not fast, never hurried, but continuous and efficient in a way that eats distance without seeming to try. An elephant can walk 20 or 30 kilometers in a day without apparent effort, moving at this same methodical pace from dawn to dusk, and over a season can trace a circuit hundreds of kilometers across, visiting different ranges as water and food availability shifts. They pass through a section where the grass grows taller, brushing against the adults' bellies and rising over the calves' backs, so that only the bobbing tips of small trunks and ears remain visible. The matriarch pushes through without slowing, creating a wake like a ship through green water, and the others follow in the channel she opens. Insects rise in clouds around them, butterflies in sudden flashes of yellow and white, bees humming between flowers, flies that land on grey skin and are whisked away by ear flaps and tail swishes in constant unconscious motion. After an hour of walking, the herd arrives at a grove of larger trees, not the scattered acacias that dot most of the savanna, but a denser cluster of leadwoods and marulas, their branches spreading wide enough to create significant shade. Here the matriarch stops and the others gather around her, grateful, for the break from direct sun. An adult female moves immediately to a marula tree and reaches up with her trunk to pull down a branch thick as a man's arm. She braces it against her forehead and pushes, using her weight as leverage, until the branch cracks and breaks. The break releases a smell of sap and fresh leaves, and several younger elephants move closer to investigate. The branch is stripped efficiently. The female uses her trunk to pull leaves into her mouth, chews them methodically, swallows, and reaches for more. Elephants are hindgut fermenters, processing enormous volumes of relatively low-quality vegetation. An adult can consume 200 kilograms or more in a day, feeding for up to 18 hours. The stripped branch, once clean of the leaves, is picked up and turned in the trunk, and the female begins peeling bark with the edge of her tusk, working at it like someone peeling an orange, revealing the white wood beneath. The bark goes into her mouth in strips, chewed thoroughly, swallowed. Nothing is wasted. Around her, Other elephants browse with similar focus. A younger female wraps her trunk around a shrub and pulls upward, testing its strength, then begins stripping leaves from top to bottom. An adolescent male, more playful than the focused females, breaks a small branch not to eat, but to scratch his side with it, rubbing the stick against his shoulder with obvious pleasure before eventually eating it. The smallest calves, not yet able to strip branches with their still developing trunks, pull at tufts of grass near the ground, succeeding mostly in creating a mess that they then try to eat with varying levels of success, learning coordination through repetition and failure. This browsing activity is not random destruction, but a form of ecological editing that has shaped African savannas for millions of years. When elephants knock down trees and break branches, they open clearings where grass can grow. When they strip bark and eat saplings, they prevent forests from becoming too dense and keep landscapes mixed between grassland and woodland. Their dung, deposited in enormous piles throughout their range, contains seeds from dozens of plant species, many of which will only germinate after passing through an elephant's digestive system, delivered with a ready package of fertilizer in exactly the conditions they need to grow. A large marula tree here may show the marks of years of elephant feeding. Bark stripped in vertical lines from ground level to twice a man's height, branches broken and hanging, the trunk scarred but still alive and growing. In another season, during fruiting time, elephants will return to feast on the marula's yellow fruits, eating them by the hundreds and spreading seeds across kilometers. Acacia trees show different signs of elephant presence. Branches snapped at specific heights, bark scratched at shoulder level where elephants have rubbed to remove parasites, or simply because the rough texture feels good, against skin. Some trees die from this attention, creating standing deadwood that becomes habitat for insects and nesting holes for birds. Others survive and grow twisted and gnarled, their forms shaped by elephant mouths and tusks as surely as trees along an ocean coast are shaped by wind. After feeding for 20 minutes, the matriarch moves away from the trees and into open ground where she begins scraping at the earth with her front foot, creating a shallow depression. She kneels, lowering her massive bulk with surprising grace, and uses her trunk to gather loose soil and dust, then flings it over her back in a brown cloud. The dust settles across her shoulders and sides, coating her in a layer of protection. This is medicine and comfort combined. The dust helps prevent sunburn on skin that, despite its thickness, can be surprisingly sensitive. It also deters biting flies and other insects, clogging their mouth parts and making the elephant less appealing as a target. Other elephants join her, each creating their own small dust bath. Soon the grove is filled with red-brown clouds, elephants standing or kneeling in their chosen spots, trunks reaching back to coat themselves again and again. Calves throw dust with enthusiastic incompetence, often missing themselves entirely and coating whoever stands nearby instead. An adolescent discovers a particularly fine patch of dust and kneels in it, rolling sideways with legs thrust out stiffly, trunk curled protectively against its face, looking for all the world like an enormous puppy rolling in something pleasant. The adults continue with more dignity, but there is something in their stillness and focus that suggests deep satisfaction. When the dust bathing ends, the herd does not immediately resume walking. Instead, the adults settle into resting postures, some standing with eyes half closed, others shifting their weight from leg to leg, an occasional ear flap stirring the hot air. Several calves lie down completely, sprawling on their sides in the dust with legs extended, using adult legs as pillows or leaning against the bulk of mothers and aunts. This is siesta time, the hottest part of the day when even the birds go quiet and the entire savanna seems to hold its breath against the weight of heat pressing down from a white-hot sky. The matriarch stands alert but relaxed, trunk resting on the ground, the tip making small patterns in the dust, as if writing something in a language only elephants can read. Her breathing is slow and deep, and every few minutes she produces a sound so low that human ears can barely detect it. A rumble that starts deep in her chest and rolls out across the savanna like distant thunder. These infrasonic calls are one of the great secret conversations of the natural world, invisible and largely inaudible to humans but fundamental to elephant society. The rumble the matriarch produces now is what researchers call a contact call, a simple message that translates roughly as, "I am here, all is well." The sound waves travel through the air for several kilometers, and they also travel through the ground, spreading out in all directions from the point where the matriarch's feet press against the earth. Other elephants detect these vibrations through specialized cells in their feet and through their trunks pressed against the ground. An elephant 5 kilometers away, standing alone or with a different herd, would feel this rumble arrive as a subtle sensation, a vibration rising up through legs and bones, and would understand immediately that another elephant is out there, calm and unthreatened, going about the ordinary business of an ordinary day. If the distant elephant responded with its own call, the matriarch would feel it in return, and the two would know of each other's existence without ever meeting. Elephants use these low-frequency calls to coordinate movement when spread across large areas, to signal when they have found water or food, to express mild alarm without triggering panic, and possibly to convey more complex information that researchers are still working to decode. A mother uses specific rumbles to call a calf that has wandered too far. A female in estrus produces particular patterns of rumbles that male elephants can detect from many kilometers away. And perhaps most mysteriously, elephants sometimes produce rumbles that seem to serve no immediate practical purpose. Sounds exchanged between family members already standing close together. Calls sent out into the evening with no response expected, as if they are simply saying "I am here" to whoever might be listening, claiming their place in the vast community of their species spread across the landscape. The hot hours pass slowly. Occasionally an elephant stirs, walks a few meters to a different patch of shade, then settles again. A small breeze arrives carrying the scent of distant rain, not falling here, perhaps not even falling anywhere nearby, but somewhere over the horizon water is dropping from clouds, and the air remembers. The matriarch lifts her head slightly, trunk rising to sample this information, filing it away in the vast catalogue of weather knowledge she carries. Not today, but soon. The rains are coming, as they always come, though the timing grows less predictable with each passing year. As the sun begins its descent from the highest point, and the quality of light shifts from white-hot to something softer, more golden, the herd begins to stir. There is no obvious signal, no trumpet or alarm. Instead, each elephant simply begins to wake and reorient. Calves climbing to their feet and shaking dust from their bodies, adults lifting trunks to test the air once more. The matriarch takes a step forward, then another, and as simply as that they are walking again. The afternoon journey takes them across different terrain. They pass a shallow pan, dry now but retaining a cracked mosaic pattern in the hardened mud that shows where water stood during the last rains. The matriarch pauses here and uses her tusk to probe the cracked earth, testing for moisture beneath. Finding none, she moves on, but she will remember this place. In the next rainy season, this pan will fill and become a temporary oasis, and the herd will return to drink and wallow in the fresh mud. For now, it is merely a landmark, a navigation point on an internal map. They cross an area where the grass has been burned recently, either by lightning or by humans managing the land. The charred ground stretches black and bare for several hundred meters, with only the first green shoots beginning to emerge. Elephants have complicated relationships with fire. They avoid active flames but return quickly once fire has passed, knowing that the new grass growing from burned ground is rich and tender. The adolescents pause to pull at these green shoots, finding them sweet compared to the tougher, older grass elsewhere. The adults allow this brief stop but do not linger. Water is still several kilometers ahead, and they want to arrive before dark. As they walk, they encounter other evidence of their own presence from previous journeys. Old dung piles, now scattered and dry, broken trees at various stages of decay, and in one spot, a cleared space where the matriarch herself knocked down a dead tree months earlier. Porcupines have been gnawing at the fallen trunk, leaving distinctive marks. Beetles have burrowed into the rotting wood. A monitor lizard, easily as long as a man is tall, is basking in sunlight on top of the log, but it scrambles away as the giants approach, moving with startling speed for something that appeared so lazy a moment before. The late afternoon light stretches the elephant's shadows into long, strange shapes that slide across the ground ahead of them. Birds that hunt in the evening are beginning to emerge, hornbills gliding between trees, their wing beats audible as rhythmic whooshing sounds. Rollers perched on exposed branches, watching for insects stirred up by the passing herd. A secretary bird, tall and stately with its crest of black feathers, paces through the grass at a distance, hunting for snakes and lizards with exaggerated high-stepping gait like a dancer. It ignores the elephants, and they ignore it, each species absorbed in its own ancient business. The path the matriarch follows curves around obstacles both visible and invisible. Here she steers clear of a village where cooking smoke rises from several points. She knows, from experience, that humans sometimes chase elephants with noise and fire when crops are threatened. And while her herd is strong enough to ignore such deterrence, if truly motivated, today there is no need for conflict. There, she guides them around a ravine that appears suddenly at the edge of a plateau, its sides too steep for safe descent with young calves in the group. These adjustments are made smoothly, without apparent thought, the accumulated knowledge of decades expressed as simple changes in direction. After another hour of walking, the landscape begins to change. The grass grows lusher, taller, with more varied plant species mixed among the dominant grasses. Trees become more common, their canopies fuller. The earth beneath the elephants' feet grows softer, damp, and then visibly wet, with standing water collecting in their footprints after each step. The air smells different here, thick with the scent of water and wet vegetation, mud and minerals, and the accumulated presence of many animals drawn to this reliable source. They are approaching a riverbed, one of the seasonal watercourses that carves through this landscape. For much of the year it runs dry, but during the rains it flows powerfully enough to reshape its banks, and even now, in the dry season, water remains in scattered pools where the bedrock dips low enough to trap groundwater seeping up from below. These permanent pools, sometimes shrinking to just a few meters across but never quite vanishing entirely, are lifelines for every creature in the region. The matriarch arrives at the top of a gentle rise and pauses, allowing the others to catch up and gather around her. From here they can look down into a broad valley where a line of tall trees marks the river's course, and between the trees the unmistakable gleam of water catching the golden evening light. Other animals are already there, a herd of impala lifting delicate heads to watch the elephants approach, zebras standing belly deep in the shallows, a cluster of warthogs kneeling awkwardly at the water's edge to drink. As the elephants appear on the rise, some of these smaller animals grow nervous and begin moving away, though not in panic. Elephants at a waterhole are a normal sight, not a threat, though their sheer size means smaller creatures prefer to drink at a safe distance. The herd descends the slope deliberately, the adults watching their footing on ground made slippery by the passage of many hooves. The calves, excited by the sight of water, try to rush ahead but are blocked by their mothers' bodies and trunks extended to create barriers. Water is important, but approaching it safely is more important still. The matriarch leads them to a section of bank that slopes gradually rather than dropping off suddenly, a place where elephants have drunk for so long that they have literally reshaped the shore into a wide, gently graded entry. She steps into the water with her front feet, then her back feet, moving slowly forward until she is standing in water that reaches her knees. She lowers her trunk, draws water up in a long inhalation that pulls perhaps 10 litres into the hollow space within, then raises her trunk to her mouth and releases, pouring the water in. The process repeats: draw, lift, pour, swallow. Around her, other adults enter the water and begin their own drinking, each finding a comfortable spot, each following the same rhythm. The adolescents are less dignified. One young female walks straight into deeper water until it reaches her chest, then bends forward and attempts to drink directly with her mouth rather than her trunk, a technique that works poorly but entertains her greatly as she snorts and blows bubbles. An adolescent male discovers that if he stands just right and sweeps his trunk across the water's surface, he can create a spray that arcs into the air and catches the evening light in brief rainbows. He does this repeatedly, apparently for no reason except that he can. The calves are chaos given flesh. The youngest, entering water deep enough to matter for perhaps the first time in its short life, walks forward carefully, trunk held high to keep it clear of the surface until the water reaches its belly and it discovers buoyancy. For a moment it appears startled by this new sensation, the sudden lifting feeling as weight becomes partially suspended, and it scrambles backward to shallower water. Its mother rumbles softly, encouraging, and after a moment's consideration, the calf tries again, this time walking in far enough to submerge its shoulders. It discovers that water is fascinating. Splashing produces sound and motion. The muddy bottom can be probed with feet, and if you put your whole head underwater, the world becomes strange and muffled and then very loud when you lift it back out gasping. Another calf, slightly older and more coordinated, has learned to drink properly, and does so with evident satisfaction, pulling water up into its trunk and then inexpertly aiming it toward its mouth, with about 50% accuracy, the rest splashing across its face and chest. Between drinks, this calf experiments with a new discovery. If you fill your trunk with water and then spray it at a sibling, the sibling reacts in gratifying ways. Soon, two calves are engaged in an impromptu water fight, trunks waving, water flying, while their mothers drink peacefully a few meters away, occasionally reaching out to ensure neither calf ventures into deeper water. The waterhole is large, perhaps 20 meters across and elongated along the riverbed, with trees leaning over its edges and their roots exposed in places where the bank has eroded. Fish move in the shallows, small catfish and tilapia, that have survived the dry season by retreating to these shrinking pools, waiting for the rains to reconnect isolated waters and allow movement once more. Birds line the opposite shore, doves and sand grouse coming in for quick, nervous drinks, a blacksmith plover calling its metallic alarm at some perceived threat, pairs of Egyptian geese watching the elephants with the critical expressions that geese always seem to wear. As the elephants drink and play and cool themselves, the light continues to change. The sun drops toward the horizon, its colour deepening from gold to orange to a red that seems to pulse with internal heat. The sky above remains bright blue, but near the sun colours bloom in impossible combinations: lavender and rose, amber and crimson, shades that last only minutes before transforming into something else. Clouds that were white earlier now glow from beneath as if lit by hidden fires. The matriarch finishes drinking and moves slightly deeper into the pool until water reaches the middle of her sides. She kneels, allowing her body to settle into the water, and immediately begins using her trunk to spray herself, across her back, over her head, along her sides. The water runs down her flanks in streams, washing away dust and dead skin, cooling her body core. She produces a sound somewhere between a rumble and a sigh, an expression of deep contentment that needs no translation. Other adults follow her lead, some kneeling, others standing but submerging themselves as deeply as possible, trunks working constantly to drench every reachable surface. One creative adolescent lies down on her side in the shallows, creating a tremendous splash and then proceeding to roll back and forth, all four legs waving in the air at various points, thoroughly soaking herself, while simultaneously churning the water into brown soup. The calves watch this performance with what appears to be admiration and immediately attempt to copy it, with mixed results that involve a lot of splashing and stumbling, but also obvious joy. For perhaps 20 minutes, the herd remains at the water, drinking, bathing, playing, and simply standing in the cool relief after a long, hot day of walking. The light continues to fade, shadows growing longer and softer, the air temperature finally beginning to drop. Other animals return to the waterhole as they judge the elephants to be calm and occupied. Zebras approaching from downstream, a small group of kudu with their spiral horns and white face markings stepping delicately from the trees, even a couple of buffaloes appearing from upstream, massive and irritable looking but willing to share the resource with the giants who outweigh them 3-1. Eventually the matriarch wades toward the shore, water streaming from her body, and climbs out onto the bank. She pauses to shake herself, an impressive sight as several tons of elephant execute what is essentially a full-body shimmy, flapping ears and trunk and dislodging a rain of water droplets that catch the last light. She walks a few meters from the water's edge and stops, waiting. The others read this signal and begin extracting themselves from the pool, adults first, urging calves ahead of them, adolescents reluctantly abandoning their games. Within minutes, the entire herd is out of the water and gathering around the matriarch, dripping, cooler, refreshed. But they do not move away immediately. Instead, the matriarch leads them parallel to the river, following its course downstream for perhaps 200 meters. She appears to be looking for something specific, and when she finds it, she stops. Here, in a small clearing between trees, the ground is littered with bones. They are old bones, bleached white by years of sun, scattered across an area perhaps 10 meters in diameter. There are large bones, femurs and ribs and sections of spine, and smaller fragments worn smooth by weather and the pawing of other animals. At the centre of the scatter lies a skull, its eye sockets dark and empty, its surface etched with fine cracks, its tusks long gone, broken off or removed years ago. This was once an elephant. The matriarch approaches the skull slowly, each step deliberate. When she reaches it, she extends her trunk and touches the smooth dome of the cranium, moving her trunk tip across the bone with a gentleness that seems almost hesitant. Her trunk traces the line where the tusk would have emerged, explores the hollow of an eye socket, runs along the curve of the jaw. She stands like this for a long moment, trunk on bone, body still. Other elephants from the herd approach and also touch the skull, each in turn or sometimes several at once, trunks extended, making contact, holding it, then withdrawing. There is no sound except the soft rush of breathing and the gentle rumbles that adults produce. Not distress calls, not alarms, but low soft vocalizations that might be acknowledgement, or might be something else entirely. The calves watch their mothers but do not approach, sensing that this is behavior beyond their current understanding. Scientists who study elephants have documented this behavior many times. Elephants encountering the bones of dead elephants and treating them differently than they treat other objects. They touch skulls and tusks with particular attention. They sometimes carry bones short distances. They return to the same death sites across years. The behavior has been called mourning, though assigning human emotional terms to animal behavior is always problematic. Perhaps it is memory, recognizing these remains as belonging to one of their own species, possibly even to a specific individual known in life. Perhaps it is something else entirely, a response to mortality that elephants feel in ways we cannot easily translate into human concepts. What is clear is that the matriarch and her family spend several minutes at this bone site, standing among the remains of what might have been a relative, a member of their own family group who died here years ago, possibly during a drought when water became scarce and the journey to the next reliable source proved too far. The matriarch might remember this elephant in life, how she moved, the sound of her voice, her place in the family structure, or perhaps the memory is hazier, a sense of familiarity attached to shapes and scents, whose source is no longer quite accessible. Or perhaps memory is not the right concept at all, and what elephants feel in these moments is something we lack the framework to properly understand. Eventually the matriarch steps back from the skull, lowering her trunk. She turns away from the bone scatter and begins walking, again back toward the river and then past it, heading into the open savanna beyond. The others follow, each casting what appears to be a final look at the bones before departing. The sun has now fully set, only the last glow of indirect light remaining in the western sky, and the first stars are appearing overhead in the darkening blue. The herd moves away from the waterhole with definite purpose. The matriarch is leading them to tonight's resting area, a spot she has chosen based on factors that include good sightlines in multiple directions, distance from human settlements, proximity to food but not so close to water that they might encounter lions or other predators also drawn to drink. She selects a location perhaps half a kilometre from the river, in open grassland dotted with a few scattered trees but largely clear. As darkness deepens, the herd settles into position. There is no circle or defensive formation, just a loose aggregation with calves naturally gravitating toward the centre and adults spacing themselves around the periphery without anyone needing to give instructions. Some elephants begin feeding immediately, pulling grass and stripping leaves from nearby shrubs, the constant need for food overriding even rest. Others stand quietly, heads lowered, trunks hanging relaxed, entering that strange elephantine state that might be sleep or might be something else. A reduced awareness, a rest that leaves them still partially alert to the world around them. The night sky reveals itself in full glory. This far from cities, with no light pollution to wash out the stars, the Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of light, countless stars packed so densely in places that individual points become impossible to distinguish. Familiar constellations wheel slowly across the dome, Scorpius rising in the east, the Southern Cross hanging near the horizon, Orion chasing eternally across the ecliptic. The moon will rise later, but for now, starlight alone illuminates the savanna, casting everything in silver and shadow. The sounds of the night savanna begin to emerge. Insects produce a constant background hum, rising and falling in waves. Crickets and cicadas and nameless others, their songs overlapping into a chorus that seems to emanate from the darkness itself. A distant hyena calls, that characteristic whooping laugh that carries for kilometres, and another answers from a different direction. Lions roar somewhere far away, a sound felt as much as heard, resonating in the chest cavity like the lowest notes of an enormous organ. The elephant's ears swivel toward these sounds, tracking them, but there is no alarm. Lions rarely attack healthy adult elephants, and a family group of this size presents a formidable defence even for a large pride. As long as the calves stay close and the adults remain aware, the night holds little danger. Every 10 or 15 minutes, one of the adult elephants produces a low rumble, barely audible but felt by their others. These contact calls continue throughout the night, maintaining an invisible web of communication that says, "I am here, you are here, all is well." Calves sleeping, pressed against their mother's legs, feel these rumbles as vibrations transmitted through flesh and bone, a constant reassurance that they are protected, that the vast solid bulk they lean against will not let harm come to them. Around midnight, the moon finally rises, a waxing gibbous shape, bright enough to cast shadows. The landscape transforms under this new light. What was mysterious becomes simply peaceful. The strange becomes familiar again. One of the adolescent females who has been dozing standing up wakes fully and decides that a midnight snack is in order. She walks to a nearby tree and begins stripping leaves, the sound of her chewing audible across the quiet night. This activity rouses several others, and soon half the herd is feeding again, moving slowly through the moonlit grass, pulling up vegetation and eating with that methodical rhythm that characterizes elephant feeding. Reach, grasp, tear, chew, swallow, repeat. The matriarch, however, remains still, standing in place with her eyes closed or nearly closed, trunk hanging, ears moving only occasionally to track sounds. She has walked many kilometres today, as she walks many kilometres most days, following paths she learned from her mother and grandmother, paths that in some cases have been used by elephants for centuries, literal highways worn into the landscape by the accumulated passage of countless feet. She has led her family to water, kept them safe from human disturbance, allowed the young to play and learn, guided them to food, taught by example, the essential lesson that survival in this environment depends on knowing where to go, and when. Tomorrow she will wake before dawn and begin the process again, reading the air and the land, making decisions about direction and distance, coordinating the movements of 14 elephants across a landscape that is at once dangerous and beautiful, harsh and generous. She carries within her not just the map of where things are, but the calendar of when they become available, when the marula fruits ripen, when the new grass emerges after fire, when the pans fill with rain, and when they dry again. This knowledge is not written anywhere. It exists only in the minds of elephants, passed from elder to young through observation and imitation, accumulated over generations, preserved as long as the species itself persists. The night deepens and the moon climbs higher, shrinking as it rises, its light growing whiter and harder. The constellation of the Southern Cross rotates around the celestial pole, marking the hours with its movement. A gentle breeze stirs the grass into rustling whispers, carrying sea scents from far away. Rain falling somewhere over the horizon, smoke from a distant fire, the complex biological signatures of thousands of living things all breathing and growing and dying under the same vast sky. The young calf, the smallest member of the herd, sleeps deeply now, lying on its side with legs stretched out, belly rising and falling with each breath. Its mother stands over it, one foot positioned carefully to avoid stepping on her offspring if she shifts weight, trunk occasionally reaching down to touch the calf's back, confirming its presence and well-being through touch. Around them, the rest of the family maintains their loose formation, some sleeping, some feeding, some simply standing in that patient elephant way, enduring and observing as their species has endured and observed for millions of years. This is their life, walking and eating and raising young, season following season, year following year, the patterns repeating but never quite identical. Droughts come and test them, rains arrive and bring abundance, calves are born and sometimes die. The old grow older and eventually leave their bones on the landscape to be touched and remembered by those who come after. Through all of this, the essential elephantness continues, the deep bonds between mothers and daughters, the patient teaching of the young, the long memory that extends across generations, the quiet reshaping of the environment through the simple act of being large animals who walk and eat and dig and knock down trees. If you were to rise now above this resting herd and watch them from the perspective of the stars, you would see them as grey shapes in silver grass, clustered in loose association, breathing in slow unison. You might see the matriarch standing slightly apart, her posture relaxed but still somehow watchful even in rest. You would see the calves in the centre, protected by the living wall of their relatives. You would see, if you looked carefully, how this herd is connected by invisible threads of kinship and memory and shared experience to other herds scattered across this landscape, all drawing from the same pools, walking the same ancient paths, remembering the same essential truths about survival in a land of extremes. The elephants themselves do not think in these grand terms. They think, if thinking is the right word, about immediate things. The taste of this grass, the position of that calf, the distant sound that might or might not matter, the ache in a foot or shoulder, the satisfaction of a full belly, the comfort of being surrounded by family. They live not in the past or future, but in the eternal present tense of animal experience, where memory serves only to inform current decisions, and tomorrow is just another today that has not yet arrived. But their present contains depths that ours often lacks. When the matriarch stands still in the moonlight, what memories move through her mind? The faces of calves she has seen born and raised, the taste of water from a spring that no longer flows, the path her mother walked, now marked by her own footprints, the sound of her grandmother's voice carried across. Years? Or perhaps nothing so specific. Just the accumulated weight of experience, the sense of place and belonging, the knowledge that she stands on ground her ancestors stood on, and her descendants will stand on after she becomes bones in the grass for others to touch and remember. The hours pass and the night world conducts its business. Somewhere a genet hunts in the branches of a tree, silent and fluid as smoke. Somewhere a porcupine waddles through the grass, rattling its quills, afraid of nothing because nothing wants to eat something that bristles with spines. Somewhere a python lies coiled around a branch, digesting a small antelope that will sustain it for weeks. Somewhere termites labour in their mound cities, moving soil grain by grain, building cathedrals that will outlast the trees around them. All the countless dramas of predator and prey, birth and death, success and failure play out simultaneously across the darkened savanna, each creature playing its role in the vast, intricate web of relationships that defines an ecosystem. The elephants, by virtue of their size, stand somewhat apart from these smaller dramas. They're too large to be prey for anything except humans, too well defended to fear most threats, capable of going where they please and doing as they choose within the limits set by water and food availability. This gives them a kind of freedom that smaller creatures lack, but it also burdens them with responsibility. Where elephants go and what they do shapes the landscape for everyone else. The paths they clear become highways for smaller animals. The trees they knock down create habitat for insects and fungi and all the species that depend on dead wood. The waterholes they dig survive to save creatures who could never dig such holes themselves. The seeds they disperse create the next generation of trees that will feed the next generation of elephants and everything else. As the hours creep toward dawn, some quality in the air begins to change. The temperature, which dropped steadily through the early night, reaches its minimum and begins a slow climb back toward warmth. The moisture in the air shifts subtly. The sounds modulate. Some night creatures grow quiet as their hunting time ends, while early risers begin tentative calls to mark the coming day. The stars, which blaze so brightly at midnight, begin to fade as the eastern sky brightens from black to deep blue to something lighter, a promise of sunrise still hidden below the horizon. The matriarch stirs, lifting her head, opening her eyes fully. She has not slept in any human sense. Elephants rarely lie down for more than a few hours, and even then they cycle between rest and awareness multiple times through the night. But she is rested, and now morning is approaching, and it is time to begin moving again. She takes a step forward, then another, heading away from the resting site toward a patch of grass that looks particularly lush. As she begins to feed, the others wake in sequence, each according to their own internal schedule, stretching and yawning and beginning the day's first round of eating. The young calf wakes to find the world brightening around it, its mother already upright and feeding. It climbs to its feet, wobbly still with sleep, and moves to nurse, pressing against its mother's front legs and reaching up to find the mammary glands located between her front limbs. The mother continues feeding while the calf nurses, her trunk reaching up to strip leaves while her body stands patiently for her offspring. This is the routine of the young: eat, sleep, nurse, play, repeat, all under the constant supervision and protection of mothers and aunts who remember their own childhoods and understand that calves must be allowed to explore but never allowed to wander too far. The sun breaks the horizon, and instantly the quality of light changes, from silvery moonlight to warm gold, from shadow and mystery to revelation and detail. Colours return: the gold of grass, the green of leaves, the rich red-brown of earth, the endless blue of sky already heating toward white. The day's heat is still hours away, but the promise of it is there in the climbing sun. The matriarch finishes her morning feeding and begins walking, setting a direction that will take them northwest across the savanna, away from the waterhole but not directly away. Her route traces a long curve that will bring them, by evening, to a different section of the same river system, where another pool waits, and different trees offer different brows. The others fall in behind her, the family group assembling itself without fuss or ceremony, each elephant knowing its place, the calves automatically moving to the protected centre, the adults spacing themselves around the vulnerable young. They walk into the rising sun, long shadows stretching behind them, marking their passage across the land. From a distance they appear as a single organism, a many-legged creature moving with surprising grace despite its size, flowing across the landscape like a dark stream across golden grass. Up close, they resolve into individuals, each with their own personality, their own slight variations in walking gait, their own preferences and quirks. But even as individuals, they remain fundamentally connected, parts of a whole that is stronger than any single member. This is how elephants have survived in Africa for millions of years, not as solitary wanderers, but as families, bound together by blood and experience and the knowledge that survival depends on cooperation. The matriarch leads because she has lived longest and learned most. The younger females support her because they will someday be matriarchs themselves and are learning how to lead by watching how it is done. The adolescents push boundaries and test limits because that is how they learn what is safe and what is not. The calves play and explore because play is the work of childhood, the way young minds learn to be elephant minds, and through it all, the bonds of family hold them together, expressed in trunk touches and rumbles and the simple willingness to walk the same paths at the same pace toward the same destinations. The savanna stretches out before them in all directions, vast and ancient, carved by wind and water and the feet of countless animals over millions of years. Mountains rise in the blue distance, hazed by heat and distance into shapes that seem more like dreams than solid rock. Clouds build slowly on the horizon, towering cumulus formations that promise rain somewhere, sometime. Though not here, not yet. The grass waves in the breeze, each stem bending and rising in patterns that create the illusion of water flowing uphill, mirages that vanish and reappear as the angle of view changes. And through this landscape, the elephants walk. They walk as their mothers walked, and their grandmothers before them, following paths that existed before humans drew borders on maps or built roads through the wilderness, paths that will persist as long as elephants exist to remember them. They carry within their minds and bodies the accumulated wisdom of their species, the hard-won knowledge of where to find water in drought and food in famine, how to read weather and interpret the behaviour of other animals, when to move and when to stay, when to be cautious and when to be bold. If you could somehow gather all the knowledge carried by all the elephants currently living, all the maps and memories and learned behaviours, all the personal histories and family traditions, all the subtle understanding of ecology and weather and animal behaviour, you would have a library of survival strategy evolved over millions of years, refined through countless trials and errors, preserved not in books or databases, but in the minds of these enormous, improbable creatures who remember everything and forget nothing important. But this knowledge is fragile in ways that ancient rock formations are not. An elephant carries perhaps 70 years of personal experience, but she also carries her mother's knowledge and her grandmother's, passed on through example and observation. If the chain breaks, if the matriarch dies before teaching the young females where the secret waterholes are, if a family group is scattered and cannot pass on its accumulated wisdom, then that knowledge is lost forever, as irretrievable as a burned library. This is why elephant conservation is not just about keeping elephants alive as individuals, but about preserving family groups and allowing natural social structures to persist across generations. The wisdom is stored in the bonds between mothers and daughters, in the patient watching of the young as they learn what the old know, in the invisible transfer of information that happens when an adolescent walks in her mother's footsteps and learns by repetition where those footsteps lead. The herd walks on through the warming morning, leaving behind them a trail of footprints that will last until the next rain smooths them away, temporary marks on an ancient landscape. They pass through pools of shade under trees and back into sunlight, through patches where the grass grows tall and sections where it has been grazed down to stubble, across ground hard as stone and ground soft as bread, over subtle rises and through gentle depressions, always moving, always eating, always aware of each other and their surroundings. A bird lands on the matriarch's back, an oxpecker, come to feed on the ticks and parasites that live in the elephant's skin. The matriarch tolerates this, accepting the mild irritation of clawed feet on sensitive skin in exchange for the service of having parasites removed. More oxpeckers arrive, hopping along her back and sides, probing with sharp beaks into the folds and crevices where insects hide. The younger elephants are less tolerant of this attention, and shake themselves to dislodge the birds, who flutter away squawking in protest before finding more accommodating hosts. Time passes. The sun climbs higher, the day grows hot, and the cycle begins again. Walk, rest, feed, walk, always with the next waterhole as the destination, always with the family as the constant, always with memory as the guide through a landscape that is both permanent and constantly changing, stable in its basic geography but fluid in its details, requiring both deep knowledge and constant adaptation. This is the life of elephants, repeated across seasons and years, as essential and as natural as the rising of the sun or the turning of the stars. It is a life built on memory and family, on patience and endurance, on the understanding that survival is not achieved through speed or aggression, but through knowing where to go and having the strength to get there. It is a life that connects past and future through the present moment, where each step forward is also a step into history, each calf raised is also a promise kept to ancestors who walked these same paths generations ago. And as the elephants walk on through the golden grass under the enormous sky, moving with the slow certainty of continental drift, they carry with them everything that makes them what they are. The size that commands respect, the intelligence that navigates challenges, the memory that preserves wisdom, and the bonds of family that transform 14 individuals into a single enduring presence. A testament to the power of remembering, the strength of connection, and the quiet grandeur of life lived in harmony with an ancient rhythm that predates humanity and may, if we are wise, long outlast it. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. Earth turns slowly beneath a veil of clouds, most of its surface wrapped in shifting blue. The ocean covers nearly 3/4 of the planet, and tonight, if you close your eyes and breathe deeply, you can imagine drifting through those waters without hurry, following whales as they move through their world from one sunrise to the next. This is not a story of chase scenes or sudden danger. This is about how whales live, how they travel, and how they fill the vast dim spaces beneath the waves with sound. The camera glides down through atmosphere and cloud, descending toward a patch of sunlit sea where light dances on the surface like scattered diamonds, and here we slip beneath, entering the whale's domain. The water is warm here, shallow enough that sunlight reaches the sandy bottom in shifting bands of gold and green. This is a protected bay, a nursery where humpback mothers rest with their newborn calves in water, calm enough to cradle the youngest lives. A calf rises slowly toward the surface, its small body moving with the unhurried grace already written into its muscles. It breaks through into air and exhales, sending a small plume of mist into the morning light. This is the calf's first breath outside the womb, the beginning of a rhythm it will follow for the rest of its life. Surface, breathe, dive, return. The mother floats nearby, her massive body a steady presence, and the calf turns toward her, nuzzling against her flank, learning the shape and scent and feel of the only anchor it knows in this boundless blue. Whales are mammals, just as we are. They breathe air, feed their young with milk, and give birth to live calves that must learn to swim and dive and find their place in the pod. These sheltered bays serve as safe classrooms where young whales build strength and coordination, where they practice holding their breath a little longer each day, where they learn to follow their mothers through the water with increasing confidence. The camera drifts slowly around the pair, close enough to see the calf's eye, dark and curious, close enough to watch the mother's flipper move gently through the water, guiding her baby back when it strays too far. They surface together, breathe together, dive a little deeper, and return to rest near the bottom where the water is warmest. Again and again this pattern repeats, a lullaby of motion and breath, the foundational rhythm that will carry the calf through years of migration and growth. The scene widens gradually, and now we see other whales at the surface in different waters. A blue whale, largest of all living creatures, rises in the open ocean and releases a blow that towers into the air, a vertical column of vapour that catches the light before dispersing on the wind. Nearby, a minke whale appears briefly, its sleek body breaking the surface for a quick breath before vanishing again into the blue. In the distance, a pod of dolphins arcs through the water, their movements quick and playful, compared to the stately rhythm of the great whales. Each species has its own pattern, its own cadence of breathing and diving, but all share the same fundamental need: air. Whale lungs are remarkably efficient, designed for life at the boundary between two worlds. When a whale surfaces, it exhales forcefully, emptying its lungs almost completely before drawing in a deep, fresh breath. That single inhalation can fill lungs the size of a small car in some of the larger species, and the oxygen is quickly absorbed and stored not just in the lungs but throughout the body, binding to hemoglobin in the blood and to myoglobin in the muscles. This allows whales to dive for extended periods, sometimes an hour or more in the case of sperm whales, without needing to surface. During these dives, the whale's heart rate slows dramatically. Blood flow is redirected away from less critical tissues toward the brain and vital organs, and the body enters a state of remarkable efficiency, using every molecule of stored oxygen with careful precision. The camera lingers on this rhythm, turning it into something meditative. Watch as the whale surfaces. See the blow expand into the air like a sigh. Breathe in as the whale breathes in. Watch as the whale arches its back, the dorsal fin or hump appearing briefly before the body slides smoothly beneath the surface. Breathe out as the whale descends. Inhale with the blow, exhale with the dive. Over and over, this pattern continues, a slow breathing exercise written across miles of ocean, a reminder that these massive creatures are, in their way, breathing the same air we breathe, just in vastly different quantities and rhythms. The water grows colder now as the camera follows migration routes toward polar and temperate feeding grounds. Here, where cold currents rise from the depths, nutrients are stirred up from the seafloor and the water blooms with life. Tiny organisms multiply in vast numbers, forming dense clouds of krill and small fish that shimmer and pulse like living constellations. This is where the giants come to feed, where baleen whales gather during the productive months to consume the enormous quantities of food they need to fuel their immense bodies. A blue whale approaches slowly, its body longer than 2 city buses placed end to end, its skin mottled blue-grey and covered with the faint scars and scratches of a life lived in open water. It swims toward a concentration of krill, mouth beginning to open wider and wider until the lower jaw drops away like the ramp of some vast cargo ship. Water rushes in, along with thousands upon thousands of tiny crustaceans, filling the whale's mouth and the pleated grooves of its throat that expand like an accordion to accommodate this enormous volume. The whale closes its mouth part way, and now the real work begins. The tongue, massive and muscular, pushes forward, forcing water out through the baleen plates that hang from the upper jaw like long flexible curtains. The baleen filters out the krill, trapping them against the tongue, and when the water has been expelled, the whale swallows, sending several 100 kilograms of food down its surprisingly narrow throat in a single gulp. This process repeats, lunge after lunge, the whale rolling and diving and surfacing in graceful arcs, each movement practiced and efficient. Nearby, other whales feed in their own styles. Humpbacks sometimes use bubble nets, swimming in circles below a school of fish and releasing air that rises in a spiral curtain. Concentrating the prey in the centre, before the whales lunge upward through the column with mouths agape. Fin whales often feed on their sides, rolling through patches of prey with a white blaze on their right jaw catching the light. The scene is not frantic but steady, a soft dance of bodies and bubbles and swirls of fleeing krill, the ancient choreography of predator and prey playing out in slow motion beneath the surface. The energy requirements are staggering. A blue whale may consume 4 tons of krill in a single day during peak feeding season, building up thick layers of blubber that will sustain it through months of fasting during migration and breeding. The feeding season is relatively short, concentrated in the summer months when polar waters are most productive, and the whales must make the most of this abundance, eating nearly constantly during daylight hours, sometimes continuing into the long twilight of high latitudes. This is their harvest time, the period when they store the fuel that will power their journeys across entire ocean basins. The camera glides away from the feeding grounds and into deeper water where sunlight begins to fade. The blue overhead shifts to darker shades, then to a deep indigo, and finally to a darkness broken only by occasional flashes of bioluminescent plankton. This is the realm of the sperm whale, a creature built for the abyss, with a massive square head that makes up 1/3 of its body length and houses the largest brain of any animal that has ever lived. A pod appears in silhouette, their bodies hanging vertically in the water column like dark pillars, some resting at the surface, others preparing for the long descent into the deep. Sperm whales are toothed whales, hunters of squid and fish in the dark mid-water and abyssal zones where sunlight never reaches. Their weapon is sound, powerful clicks produced in the complex acoustic structures within their heads, clicks so loud they can stun prey, and so precise they can paint a detailed picture of the world through echolocation. A whale prepares to dive, taking several deep breaths at the surface, each inhalation visible as a blow that angles forward and to the left, a distinctive signature of the species. The breathing quickens slightly, then deepens, and finally the whale lifts its broad tail flukes high into the air and slips downward into the dark. The camera follows this descent, and we enter a different kind of meditation. The whale's heart rate slows from perhaps 30 beats per minute to 10, then to as few as 3 or 4 during the deepest portion of the dive. Blood flow is redirected, the whale's body becomes a vessel of pure efficiency, and the clicks begin. They start as slow, regular pulses, then speed up as the whale approaches the depth where prey might be found. These clicks travel outward through the water, striking objects and bouncing back, and from the returning echoes the whale constructs a sonic image of its surroundings, the contours of a seamount slope, the scattered presence of fish, and somewhere in the darkness the shape of a squid, perhaps a large one, hovering in neutral buoyancy. The water around the camera is nearly black now, just the faintest glow of bioluminescence marking the whale's passage. The sense is of drifting through a starless sky, suspended in 3-dimensional space with no visible floor or ceiling. The clicks continue, steady as a heartbeat, and we imagine the whale adjusting its path, moving closer to its prey, the final moments of the hunt invisible to us, but written in sound. There is no graphic violence here, no thrashing struggle. Instead, the focus is on the idea that somewhere in this darkness, the whale finds what it needs, takes it with practiced precision, and then turns slowly, leisurely, back toward the distant surface. The ascent takes time, the whale rising through layers of increasing light, and finally it breaks through into air, exhales in a tall blow, and breathes deeply, recovering before the next dive begins. Sound is everywhere in the ocean, travelling faster and farther than it does in air. Light fades quickly with depth, penetrating only the upper few hundred meters at most, but sound can carry for hundreds or even thousands of kilometers under the right conditions. Whales have evolved to use this property, filling the ocean with calls that serve as communication, navigation, and perhaps something more complex that we're only beginning to understand. The camera moves through mid-depth waters now, and the soundtrack shifts to foreground the sounds themselves. The long rolling songs of humpback whales, complex sequences of moans, cries, and whistles that can last for 20 minutes or more before repeating. These songs are sung primarily by males during the breeding season, and while their exact function is still debated, they likely serve to attract mates and establish presence over large areas. We see the songs as something visual, long glowing waves moving outward from the whale, passing around seamounts and through submarine canyons, bending and refracting through layers of different temperature and salinity, sometimes trapped in channels where sound moves with remarkable efficiency. These calls overlap with others: the sharp clicks of dolphins, the low, almost infrasonic rumbles of blue whales, the varied whistles and squeaks of pilot whales. The ocean is not silent, but filled with a constant conversation, a planetary lullaby of voices in different registers, some so low that humans can feel them more than hear them, others high and clear enough to sound almost musical. Different populations have distinct dialects. Humpback whales in the North Atlantic sing different songs from those in the South Pacific, and within a season, all the males in one area will sing more or less the same song with small variations. Over time, these songs change, phrases dropping out and new elements appearing, and the changes spread through the population like a slow cultural drift. Scientists recording these songs have noticed patterns that suggest innovation and imitation, creativity within a framework of shared structure. Some whale calls are simpler, contact calls that allow pod members to keep track of each other over distances of several kilometres, brief vocalizations that say, in effect, "I am here, where are you?" and receiving a reply that confirms connection in the vastness. Blue whales produce some of the loudest calls in the animal kingdom, pulses at such low frequencies that they can travel across entire ocean basins. A call made off the coast of Chile might be detected by listening stations near Antarctica, over 5,000 kilometres away. These long-distance calls may help individuals find each other for breeding in the open ocean, or they may serve as navigation markers, the acoustic equivalent of lighthouses that whales use to orient themselves on their long migrations. The ocean becomes, in this light, a space crisscrossed by invisible lines of sound, a web of communication that connects individuals and populations across distances we can barely comprehend. And night after night, year after year, these songs continue, a living archive of social connection and evolutionary heritage. The camera zooms out now to show the broad sweeping arcs of whale migrations, lines stretching from the Antarctic feeding grounds up toward tropical calving areas, from the Arctic down to temperate breeding zones, invisible highways marked not on any map but written into the biology and behaviour of the whales themselves. Temperature plays a role, as does the distribution of prey and the need for warm, calm waters where newborn calves can take their first breaths without fighting heavy seas. Whales use multiple cues to navigate: the angle of the sun, the position of stars at night, the Earth's magnetic field, and perhaps the memory of landmarks, underwater mountains and ridge systems that serve as waypoints on journeys that span thousands of kilometres. We follow a single humpback on its migration, a female heavy with stored fat, leaving the rich feeding grounds of the Antarctic as the austral summer ends. She travels steadily northward, not rushing but maintaining a pace of several hundred kilometres per week, surfacing regularly to breathe, diving to moderate depths where the swimming is easiest, occasionally detouring around islands or through narrow straits that her ancestors have used for generations. At night she rests near the surface, drifting in a state somewhere between sleep and waking, one half of her brain at a time shutting down while the other remains alert enough to remember to breathe. The stars wheel overhead, the Milky Way bright and clear above the empty ocean, and she continues, guided by instinct and memory and the subtle pull of the planet's magnetic field. Weeks pass. The water grows warmer, the colour shifts from the dark grey-blue of high latitudes to the clearer turquoise of tropical seas. She enters a sheltered bay, a place she was born in years ago, a place where she has given birth before. Other humpbacks are already here, males singing their long complex songs, females with calves from earlier in the season beginning to prepare their young for the long journey back to feeding grounds. She will remain here for weeks or even months, fasting, living off her blubber reserves, waiting for the right time to begin the return journey. The migration is a marathon, an epic journey etched into her body and mind, and it is repeated by her kind around the world, populations moving north and south, east and west, following routes that have been refined over millions of years. Not all whales migrate in the same way. Some, like orcas, remain in relatively localised areas year-round, following resident populations of fish or marine mammals. Others, like grey whales, undertake one of the longest migrations of any mammal, travelling from Arctic feeding grounds to the lagoons of Baja California and back. a round trip of up to 20,000 kilometres. The patterns vary, but the underlying principle is the same. Whales move through the ocean not as wanderers but as travellers with purpose, following the rhythms of the seasons and the distribution of the resources they need to survive. The scene shifts to show the social structure of whales, the bonds that tie individuals together across years and even lifetimes. An orca pod surfaces in coordinated breaths, a family group consisting of a matriarch, her daughters, and their young. Orcas are among the most social of all whales, living in stable matrilineal groups where calves stay with their mothers for life, learning hunting techniques and vocal dialects that are passed down through generations. The camera follows as the pod moves through coastal waters, the calves tucked in the protected space between adults, juveniles practicing breaches and spy hops, lifting their heads above the surface to look around, mimicking behaviours they have seen the adults perform. Pilot whales show similar social cohesion, travelling in groups of dozens or even hundreds, their movements synchronised, their calls overlapping in a constant acoustic dialogue. Sperm whales also live in social groups, though the structure is different. Females and young remain together in nursery schools, while adult males roam more widely, visiting different groups during the breeding season. The old matriarchs, grey with age and covered in scars from encounters with squid and other whales, take slightly shorter dives than the younger females, but they still lead, their experience and memory guiding the group to productive feeding areas and safe resting zones. Calves learn by watching, by following, by trying and failing and trying again. A young orca practices herding fish against the surface, not quite getting the timing right, overshooting the school and having to circle back. An adult demonstrates, moving more slowly, waiting for the fish to cluster, then stunning them with a sharp slap of the tail. The calf tries again, gets a little closer, and the learning continues. This is culture in its way, the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next, not through genes alone but through observation and practice, through the accumulation of techniques that can vary from one group to another even within the same species. The bond between mother and calf is particularly strong. For the first year or more the calf stays close, nursing, learning to dive, learning the voices of its family members, beginning to understand the complex social world it has been born into. In some species, mothers will support injured or ill calves at the surface, helping them breathe, refusing to leave even when the calf does not survive. This behaviour has been observed and recorded, documented in field notes and photographs, a testament to the emotional lives of these animals, lives far richer and more complex than we once imagined. The ocean is changing, and whales must navigate not only the ancient rhythms of current and season, but also the newer pressures of a human-dominated world. Shipping lanes crisscross the major ocean basins, and the low-frequency noise of engines and propellers can mask whale calls, making it harder for individuals to communicate over long distances. Climate change is shifting the distribution of prey, warming polar waters and altering the timing of seasonal blooms, forcing whales to adjust their migration schedules or search for food in new areas. Entanglement in fishing gear and collisions with ships remain significant threats for some populations, and though industrial whaling has largely ended, the recovery of whale populations has been slow and uneven. But there are also reasons for hope. Scientists are tagging whales with sophisticated sensors that record their dives, their movements, their vocalizations, building detailed maps of how whales use the ocean and where critical habitats lie. Hydrophone arrays listen to the ocean's soundscape, monitoring whale populations and tracking changes in behaviour over time. This information is used to establish marine protected areas, to reroute shipping lanes away from high-density whale zones, and to set seasonal speed limits in areas where calves are born. Some populations, like the humpbacks of the North Atlantic, have rebounded significantly since the end of commercial whaling, their songs now heard in waters where they had been silent for decades. The message is not one of crisis, but of care, of human curiosity and commitment to sharing the ocean with the other intelligences that inhabit it. Many people are listening now, trying to make room for these songs in a busier, noisier world, recognizing that the health of whale populations is tied to the health of the ocean itself, and that the ocean's health is ultimately inseparable from our own. The light is fading now, evening settling over the water, and the camera moves into the most soothing phase of the night. Whales surface in starlight, their blows briefly visible as silver mist against the dark sky. Bioluminescent plankton swirl around their bodies as they swim, leaving trails of pale green light that fade slowly into the blackness. The Milky Way stretches overhead, a river of stars reflected faintly on the calm surface of the sea, and for a moment it is hard to tell which is the ocean and which is the sky, both filled with light and motion, both vast beyond easy comprehension. The themes of the night come together here, whales breathing at the surface like slow metronomes, marking time with their steady rhythm, diving into dark water where light cannot reach, their bodies moving through pressure and cold with effortless grace, talking in low notes that vibrate through the deep, reaching out across kilometres to touch the minds of others, to say I am here, to ask where are you, to sing the long, complex songs whose meanings we are only beginning to understand. You're invited to sync your breathing with this imagery. Breathe in as a whale surfaces and exhales, filling the air with its breath. Breathe out as the whale arches its back and slips quietly below, descending into the blue, into the dark, into the ancient silence that is not silence at all but filled with sound. Inhale with the blow, exhale with the dive. Feel the rhythm, slow and steady, the heartbeat of the ocean itself, a pulse that has continued for millions of years and will continue long after this night has passed. The last minutes offer very few new facts, just the soft repetition of rising and diving, the distant songs weaving through the water like threads in a vast tapestry, the morning light beginning to spread gently across the eastern horizon, pale pink and gold reflecting on the surface. The camera pulls back slowly, showing silhouetted whales moving along a calm ocean at dawn, their blows catching the first sunlight, glowing briefly like small fires before dispersing into the cool morning air. The narrator's voice is soft now, almost a whisper, reminding you that these songs will continue through the day and the next night. Whether you are awake or asleep, that somewhere in the ocean, whales are breathing, diving, singing, feeding, migrating, giving birth, learning, teaching, living out their long lives in the blue world that covers most of our shared planet. The camera lingers on a final image, a humpback whale at the surface perfectly still, resting in the gentle swells, and then slowly it breathes, the blow rising into the dawn light and dives, the tail flukes lifting gracefully above the water before sliding beneath, leaving only a smooth circle on the surface, a footprint that fades as the ocean closes over it, and the world continues, wrapped in water, wrapped in sound, wrapped in the endless breathing of the whales. The circle on the surface smooths and vanishes, and beneath, the whale descends through layers of light that shift from gold to green to deepening blue. The ocean is not uniform but stratified, divided into zones by temperature and salinity, by the presence or absence of light, by the creatures that inhabit each level. The whale passes through the sunlit surface layer, where photosynthesis occurs and where most of the ocean's visible life congregates, then deeper into the twilight zone where only the faintest blue glow penetrates, and finally toward the midnight zone where darkness is absolute, except for the occasional flash of bioluminescence, the living light produced by organisms that have evolved to create their own illumination in a world without sun. Each zone has its own character, its own suite of adaptations, its own rhythm of life. In the surface waters, small fish school in tight formations, their silver sides flashing as they turn in unison, a defense against predators that relies on confusion and the dilution of individual risk. Jellyfish pulse slowly through the water, trailing tentacles like delicate threads. Sea turtles paddle past, ancient mariners whose ancestors swam these same waters when dinosaurs still walked the land. The whale passes through this busy layer without pausing, its destination deeper, its body built for pressures that would crush most air-breathing animals. In the twilight zone, the light is strange and muted, a perpetual dusk where eyes must be large and sensitive to catch the few photons that filter down from above. Here, creatures have evolved extraordinary shapes. Fish with enormous mouths and extendable stomachs that allow them to swallow prey larger than themselves, squid with eyes the size of dinner plates. The largest eyes in the animal kingdom evolved to detect the faint silhouettes of prey or predators against the dim background glow. Some animals migrate vertically each day, rising toward the surface at night to feed and descending again at dawn to avoid predators, the largest daily migration of biomass on the planet, though it happens largely unseen by human eyes. The whale continues downward, its body perfectly adapted to this journey. The rib cage is flexible, allowing the lungs to collapse under pressure, preventing nitrogen from dissolving into the bloodstream and causing the condition known as the bends. The muscles are rich with myoglobin, storing oxygen in dense concentrations, and the whale's metabolism has shifted into a low-energy state, conserving every resource. The clicks continue, faster now, a rapid-fire series of pulses that create a sonic image of the world ahead. The whale can detect a fish the size of a human hand from over 100 meters away, can distinguish between different species of squid based on the subtle variations in the echoes, can navigate through complete darkness with a precision that rivals vision in clear air. At depths of 500 meters, 700, 1,000, the pressure is immense, dozens of atmospheres bearing down on every surface. Yet the whale moves through this environment as if it were nothing, as if pressure were merely another property of the medium, like temperature or salinity, something to be noted and accommodated but not feared. The squid it seeks live at these depths, large species with muscular mantles and long feeding tentacles, creatures that themselves are predators, hunting fish, and smaller squid in the darkness. The whale locates its prey through echolocation, approaches with movements we cannot see, and feeds, its narrow throat swallowing prey items whole or in large pieces. The process efficient and practiced, honed over millions of years of evolution. After 20 minutes, 30, perhaps 45, the whale begins its return. The ascent is gradual, the body rising through the same layers it descended through, pressure decreasing, light slowly returning. The whale's heart rate begins to increase as it approaches the surface, preparing the body to resume normal functioning, and finally, the dark shape rises into the light, breaks through into air and exhales, a tall blow that speaks of depths and darkness and successful hunts in a world we can barely imagine. The whale breathes deeply, once, twice, 3 times, 4, recovering, oxygenating tissues, preparing for the next dive or perhaps choosing to rest here at the surface, drifting in the gentle swells, conserving energy. Other whales have different strategies, different approaches to the challenge of finding food in the ocean's vastness. Grey whales feed primarily on the seafloor in shallow Arctic waters, diving to the bottom and turning on their sides to suction up amphipods and other small crustaceans from the sediment, leaving long furrows in the mud that can be seen from above. Right whales skim feed at the surface, swimming with their mouths open through dense concentrations of copepods, their baleen filtering out the tiny crustaceans in a continuous process that can last for hours. Beaked whales, among the most mysterious and least known of all whale species, dive to extreme depths, some species regularly reaching 2,000 meters or more, holding their breaths for over 2 hours, hunting squid in the abyssal zone where few other mammals venture. The diversity of strategies reflects the diversity of the ocean itself, the multitude of niches and opportunities that exist in a realm covering more than 70% of the planet's surface. Whales have radiated into these niches, each species evolving specialized adaptations that allow it to exploit particular resources to survive and thrive in particular environments. The result is a family tree that includes the smallest members, like the vaquita, barely 1.5 meters long, and the largest, the blue whale, reaching over 30 meters and weighing as much as 2,000 adult humans. Between these extremes lie dozens of other species, each with its own story, its own place in the ocean's tapestry. The camera drifts now through open ocean far from any coast, a realm of endless blue where the seafloor may lie 5,000 meters below and the nearest land is hundreds of kilometers away. This is the pelagic zone, the open sea, and it is here that some whales spend most of their lives, rarely coming close to continents or islands, living entirely in the 3-dimensional space of the water column. A pod of short-finned pilot whales moves through this emptiness, travelling steadily in a loose formation, their bodies dark against the lighter blue below. They are not rushing, not fleeing, just travelling, covering distance with the patient endurance that characterises so much of whale behaviour. The ocean appears empty from above, a featureless expanse of water, but the whales know differently. They can detect temperature boundaries where different water masses meet, fronts where currents converge and bring nutrients and prey closer to the surface. They can sense the presence of seamounts rising from the abyssal plains, underwater mountains that create upwelling and concentrate marine life. They remember productive areas from previous years, locations where food has been reliable, and they return to these places when the season is right, navigating across vast distances with remarkable accuracy. The sun moves across the sky, marking the passage of hours, and the whales continue their journey, pausing occasionally to rest, to socialise, to engage in behaviours whose purposes we can only guess at. Two whales swim side by side, their bodies nearly touching, perhaps mother and calf, perhaps two adults reinforcing social bonds. A juvenile breaches, throwing its entire body out of the water in an explosion of spray, landing with a tremendous splash that can be heard for kilometres. The reason for breaching is still debated. Communication, parasite removal, play, or simply the expression of high spirits, the joy of movement in a body built for power and grace. Spy hopping is another common behaviour, the whale rising vertically in the water until its head and eyes are above the surface, rotating slowly, looking around at the world above the waves. What do they see? The shape of distant land, the position of the sun, the presence of birds that might indicate food nearby. We can only speculate, but the behaviour suggests curiosity, awareness, and interest in the world beyond the immediate sensory bubble of the underwater realm. After a few seconds, or sometimes a minute or more, the whale slips back beneath the surface and continues on its way. The light changes as afternoon moves toward evening, the sun lower in the sky, the colour of the water shifting from bright blue to deeper shades touched with gold. Seabirds wheel overhead, albatrosses and petrels on journeys of their own, some of them flying thousands of kilometres across the open ocean, tracking weather systems and food sources with navigational abilities that rival those of the whales below. The two realms, air and water, are separate yet connected, birds diving briefly beneath the surface to catch fish, whales surfacing to breathe the same air the birds fly through, both groups of animals bound by the need for oxygen, both shaped by the ocean's rhythms and resources. As twilight approaches, the ocean takes on a different character. The surface becomes calmer, the wind often dropping as the land releases its heat, and atmospheric pressure patterns shift. The water is glassy now in some places, reflecting the sky like a mirror, and the first stars begin to appear, faint at first, then brighter as darkness deepens. A humpback whale surfaces in this stillness, its blow catching the last light of day, glowing briefly orange and pink before fading to grey. The whale breathes slowly, in no hurry, its body resting in the calm water, and we can see the barnacles encrusting its skin, the scars from old injuries, the remoras clinging to its flanks, small fish that hitch rides on larger animals, feeding on scraps and parasites. These barnacles are not parasites but hitchhikers, filtering plankton from the water as the whale swims, gaining mobility and access to food. Rich areas they could never reach on their own. Some individual humpbacks carry hundreds of kilograms of barnacles, entire ecosystems travelling with them across oceans. The relationship is generally considered commensal rather than parasitic, the whale providing transportation and habitat, while suffering no significant harm, though the added weight and drag may have minor effects on swimming efficiency. Other organisms also use whales as habitat. Whale lice, small crustaceans that live in the folds of skin and around the eyes and blowholes, and various species of bacteria and algae that colonize the skin itself. A whale is not just an individual but a community, a moving island that supports numerous other species, and when a whale dies and its body sinks to the deep sea floor, it becomes a whale fall, a sudden input of nutrients into an otherwise food-poor environment, and specialized organisms colonize the carcass, feeding on the flesh, the bones, even the lipids stored within the skeleton, a process that can last for decades, creating a succession of communities that depend entirely on this one massive input of energy from the surface world. The stars are fully visible now, the Milky Way a bright band across the sky, and the ocean is dark except where bioluminescence flares. A whale passes through a patch of dinoflagellates, single-celled organisms that produce light when disturbed, and its movement triggers a cascade of blue-green sparkles, outlining the whale's body in ghostly luminescence, a living constellation moving through the water. The effect is magical, ethereal, a reminder that the ocean holds wonders that seem to belong more to fantasy than to the natural world, yet they are real, the products of evolution and chemistry and the particular conditions that exist in this realm. The whale's blow is visible in this darkness as a burst of spray caught briefly by starlight, and then the whale arches and dives, The luminescence swirling around its tail flukes as they lift and descend, leaving a glowing trail that fades slowly into the black. Beneath the surface, the whale moves through a world we cannot see, guided by senses we do not possess, living a life whose details remain largely mysterious despite decades of research and thousands of hours of observation. We have learned much, but there is so much more we do not know. So many questions still unanswered about how whales perceive their world, how they think, what they feel, whether they have culture and language in ways we would recognise, whether they have concerns and joys and fears analogous to our own. The evidence suggests that whales are far more cognitively complex than we once believed. They have large brains with highly convoluted cerebral cortices, regions associated with higher-order thinking in mammals. They show signs of self-awareness, passing the mirror test in some species, recognising themselves as distinct individuals. They engage in play, in teaching, in what appears to be grieving when a calf or pod member dies. They have regional dialects in their vocalizations, traditions of behaviour passed down through generations, innovations that spread through populations like cultural memes. They cooperate in complex ways, coordinating their movements to hunt more effectively, protecting injured individuals, sometimes even interacting cooperatively with other species. Instances documented of whales and dolphins working together, of whales responding to the distress calls of seals being attacked by predators. These observations push us to reconsider what we mean by intelligence, by consciousness, by personhood. If whales are aware, if they have rich inner lives, if they communicate in sophisticated ways and possess cultural knowledge, then what are our ethical obligations toward them? These are not easy questions, and they touch on deep issues of how we relate to the non-human world, how we balance our needs and desires against the welfare of other beings with whom we share the planet. The camera offers no answers, only images and information, but the questions linger, implicit in every blow, every dive, every song that echoes through the deep. The night deepens. In different parts of the ocean, different scenes unfold. In the Antarctic, orcas work together to hunt seals resting on ice floes, creating waves that wash over the ice and knock the seals into the water. In the Caribbean, a female sperm whale nurses her calf in warm, clear water, the calf pressed against her belly, drinking milk that is incredibly rich in fat, fuel for the rapid growth that will allow it to join the pod on deep dives in the months to come. In the North Pacific, a blue whale travels alone through the darkness, its low-frequency calls pulsing outward, searching perhaps for another of its kind in the vastness. The loneliness of the largest animal ever to exist, somehow made more poignant by the scale of the ocean it inhabits. In the Arctic, belugas swim beneath the ice, their white bodies ghostly in the dim light that filters through from above, using leads and cracks to breathe, sometimes trapped when ice forms too quickly, their survival dependent on finding open water or maintaining breathing holes through the winter. In the Indian Ocean, Bride's whales feed on sardine runs, the water boiling with fish and predators, birds diving from above, sharks and dolphins attacking from the sides, and the whales lunging through the chaos with mouths open, gulping down fish by the thousand. Each scene is a thread in the larger tapestry, a moment in the ongoing story of whales and the ocean they inhabit. The camera returns to the image of a single whale at rest, floating at the surface in calm water, the stars reflected all around it. The whale breathes slowly, the rhythm peaceful, almost hypnotic. Inhale, a pause, exhale, the blow rising gently into the night air. Inhale again, the body slightly lifting as the lungs fill. Exhale, the body settling back, relaxed, at ease. This is the fundamental rhythm, the pattern that underlies everything else. Breath, the exchange of gases that powers metabolism, the oxygen that binds to hemoglobin and myoglobin, that fuels the muscles, that allows the brain to function, that makes life possible in all its complexity and wonder. You are breathing too, in your own rhythm, and perhaps now your breath has synchronized with the whale's, slowed to match its pace, and you feel the calmness that comes from slow, deep breathing, the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's rest and digest mode, the opposite of fight or flight. The whale has given you this gift, this reminder that breath is life, that slowing down is possible, that the world continues its turning whether we rush or rest, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply breathe, simply be present, simply exist in the moment without striving or worrying or planning. The eastern horizon begins to lighten, almost imperceptibly at first, a faint lessening of the darkness, a hint of deep blue emerging from black. The whale continues to rest, unhurried, and slowly the light grows, spreading upward from the horizon, stars fading one by one as the sky transitions from night to dawn. The ocean takes on colour again, first grey, then the palest blue, then richer shades as the sun approaches the horizon. The whale stirs, takes a deeper breath, and begins to move, swimming slowly through the calm water, leaving a trail of disturbed surface that catches the growing light. Other whales appear now, silhouettes against the brightening sky, scattered across miles of ocean, but connected by invisible threads of sound and social relationship. A mother and calf surface together, their blows synchronized. A pod of dolphins arcs through the water nearby, their movements energetic, playful, a contrast to the stately pace of the larger whales. A fin whale, second largest of all whales, glides past in the middle distance, its body sleek and powerful, built for speed and endurance, capable of sustained swimming at speeds that would exhaust most other marine mammals. The sun breaks the horizon, a brilliant point of light that expands into a disk, spilling golden light across the water, and the whales are illuminated, their blows catching the light, glowing like small fires, like beacons, like signals sent across the ocean. This is the moment when night becomes day, when darkness gives way to light, when the cycle begins again, the same cycle that has repeated since whales first evolved from terrestrial ancestors millions of years ago, since the first proto-whales ventured into shallow seas, since their descendants adapted to deeper water, to longer dives, to lives spent entirely in the ocean with no return to land. That evolutionary history is written in the bones of whales, in the vestigial hip bones that no longer support legs, in the finger bones that still exist within the flippers, in the blowholes that are modified nostrils migrated to the top of the head. Whales are descended from even-toed ungulates, relatives of modern hippos and deer and pigs, land mammals that return to the sea in one of evolution's most dramatic transformations. The fossil record shows the intermediate forms, creatures with legs and tails, creatures that spent time both on land and in water, creatures that gradually became more streamlined, more specialized, until they could no longer survive outside the ocean, until the ocean became their entire world. This transformation took millions of years, countless generations of small changes accumulating into the profound differences we see today. The process is still ongoing, whales still evolving, still adapting to changing conditions, still responding to the pressures of survival and reproduction in an environment that is itself constantly changing. Evolution has no end point, no final, perfect form, only the continuous adjustment of organisms to their circumstances, the winnowing of the less fit and the propagation of the more successful, the slow dance of genes and environment that produces the diversity of life we see around us. The whales swimming through this dawn are the current expressions of that process, magnificent in their adaptations, perfectly suited to their oceanic lives, yet also vulnerable to changes that happen too quickly for evolution to track, changes driven by human activity and technology, and the rapid transformation of the global environment. The ocean is warming, acidifying, filling with noise and plastic and chemical pollutants, and whales must navigate these changes just as they navigate currents and temperature gradients, with no choice but to adapt or suffer the consequences. Yet they persist, these giants and their smaller cousins, swimming through dawn and day and dusk and night, breathing, feeding, singing, raising their young, maintaining the ancient patterns even as the ocean changes around them. There is resilience here, a toughness born of millions of years of survival through ice ages and warm periods, through volcanic eruptions and meteor impacts, through the rise and fall of countless other species. Whales have endured, and with care and attention and a willingness to share the ocean, they may continue to endure, their songs echoing through the deep long into the future, a reminder that we are not alone on this planet, that intelligence and awareness, and perhaps even wisdom exist in forms very different from our own. The camera pulls back slowly, the individual whales becoming smaller, the view encompassing more ocean, more sky, the curvature of the earth becoming visible as we rise higher and higher, until the whales are invisible beneath us, until the ocean is once again the dominant feature, blue and vast and wrapped around the turning sphere of the planet. But we know now what lies beneath that surface, the lives being lived in the depths and shallows, the constant motion and sound and breath, the songs that never cease. And knowing this, the ocean seems less empty, less alien, more like a home for beings as worthy of consideration and protection as any on land, perhaps more so for their very difference, for the window they offer into other ways of being, other modes of consciousness, other solutions to the challenges of existence. The final image holds on the earth from space, mostly blue, clouds drifting, and then fades slowly to darkness, to silence, inviting rest, inviting sleep, inviting dreams perhaps of swimming through warm water, of diving deep, of singing songs that travel farther than sight, of breathing in rhythm with the ancient pulse of the ocean, of becoming, for a moment, something other than human, something vast and patient and perfectly at home in the blue immensity, something that knows without words that the ocean is not empty, has never been empty, will never be empty, as long as there are whales to swim through its depths and sing their songs into the listening dark. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. The camera drifts down through layers of atmosphere, through wisps of cloud that catch the last light of a sun that set hours ago. Below, the curve of Earth rotates slowly in darkness, and at the bottom of the world, a white continent emerges from shadow. This is Antarctica, ringed by dark water that never stops moving, never stops churning with cold currents that circle the pole like a vast, slow river. Tonight, we will visit the penguins, not rushing, not dramatizing, but moving gently from colony to colony as if we had all the time in the world. Because tonight is not about urgency. Tonight is about feathers and ice and the quiet patterns that repeat themselves across thousands of miles of frozen coast. Close your eyes if you want. Listen. Imagine the wind, the snow, the sound of waves breaking against ice that has been there for centuries. A penguin is a bird that gave up the sky. Somewhere in the deep past, their ancestors folded their wings into flippers, traded air for water, and became swimmers instead of flyers. Their bodies are shaped like torpedoes now, dense and streamlined, covered in feathers so tightly packed that water cannot reach the skin beneath. They are seabirds, all of them, tied to the ocean in ways that other birds are not. There are many species scattered across the southern half of the planet, from the coldest ice to temperate beaches where the sun is warm and the wind carries the smell of grass instead of snow. But they all share the same basic design. The upright posture on land, a torpedo dive in water, and a life split between two worlds. Tonight we will meet 5 of them. Emperors in the deep winter, Adeles and chinstraps in the brief Antarctic summer, gentoos on beaches where green things grow, rockhoppers on cliffs above a crashing sea. Each one has found its own way of surviving, its own small corner of the vast southern ocean, its own rhythm of breeding and feeding and raising young in places that seem, to human eyes, impossibly harsh. The screen fades to black, then slowly brightens into a landscape of pure cold. This is the Weddell Sea in the middle of winter, when the sun does not rise for months, and the only light comes from stars and the occasional shimmer of aurora across the southern horizon. The sea ice stretches flat and white in every direction, marked only by pressure ridges where plates of ice have collided and buckled upward into frozen walls. The temperature is 60 below zero. The wind is steady, relentless, scraping loose snow across the surface in long, low rivers of white. And standing in the middle of this frozen desert, far from open water, far from any shelter, are the emperor penguins. They are gathered in a huddle, thousands of them, packed so tightly that individual birds are hard to distinguish. From a distance, the huddle looks like a single dark mass, slightly oval, slowly shifting and breathing as birds on the outside work their way toward the centre, and birds in the centre gradually drift back out. Each penguin stands upright, nearly 4 feet tall, with a sleek black back and a white belly marked with pale yellow and orange around the neck and cheeks. They do not move much. They stand, and they wait, and they endure. This is how emperors breed, not in the spring like most birds, but in the coldest, darkest part of the year. The females have already laid their eggs and returned to the sea, leaving the males to incubate them through the winter. Each male balances a single egg on the tops of his feet, tucked under a warm fold of belly skin called a brood pouch. He will stand like this for 2 months without eating, without moving more than a few steps, keeping that egg at precisely the right temperature while the world around him tries to freeze everything solid. The huddle is their survival. Alone, a penguin would lose heat faster than its body could produce it. But together, packed shoulder to shoulder, they create a microclimate, a pocket of warmth in the middle of the ice. The temperature inside the huddle can be 30 or 40 degrees warmer than the air outside. It is not comfortable, but it is survivable. They take turns on the outside where the wind hits hardest. A bird on the edge will lean into the wind, feathers compressed, breath-forming clouds of ice crystals around its head. After a while, the entire huddle shifts, a slow, coordinated shuffle, and the bird that was on the edge finds itself deeper in the pack. Another bird takes its place at the windward side. The cycle repeats, over and over, hour after hour, day after day. There is no sound except the wind and the occasional low call, a long trumpeting note that echoes across the ice. These are contact calls, birds checking in with their neighbours, maintaining the social bond that holds the huddle together. Sometimes a bird will stretch, lifting one flipper and then the other, preening a few feathers, then settling back into position. But mostly they are still. They have turned themselves into a single organism, a living heat engine, using cooperation to create a pocket of survivable space in a place where survival should be impossible. The camera lingers on the huddle as the aurora flickers overhead, green and violet curtains of light rippling silently across the stars. Snow falls, fine and dry, settling on black backs and melting slowly from body heat. The huddle tightens, the wind passes, the huddle shifts a few steps, the wind returns. This is the rhythm of the emperor winter. Endure, cooperate, wait. Wait for the females to return from the sea, wait for the eggs to hatch, wait for the sun to come back, wait for the ice to break and the ocean to open again. For now, there is only this: the huddle, the ice, the wind, the stars. The darkness begins to soften, not all at once, but gradually over days and weeks, as the sun climbs back toward the horizon and the long polar night gives way to dawn. The sky brightens from black to deep blue to silver, and the ice begins to glow with reflected light. The calendar has turned. The emperors are still there, still huddling, but their eggs have hatched into small grey chicks that huddle under the brood pouches now, and the females have returned, bellies full of fish, ready to take over feeding duties while the males finally walk back to the sea to hunt. But we are moving now, drifting with the light across hundreds of miles of ice and water to a different kind of colony, a different kind of penguin. The camera follows the retreating ice edge north and east to where the Antarctic Peninsula reaches up towards South America like a frozen finger. Here the summer is brief but intense. The ice melts back from rocky islands and exposed headlands, and the ocean fills with krill and fish drawn to the burst of plankton that blooms in the long daylight. This is where the Adelie penguins come to breed. They are smaller than emperors, about 2 feet tall with crisp black and white plumage, and a neat white ring around each eye that gives them a look of permanent surprise. They are bustling, energetic, constantly in motion. The colony is noisy and crowded, spread across a rocky slope that runs from the high ground down to the beach. There are thousands of nests, each one a shallow depression lined with pebbles, each pair of adults taking turns sitting on 2 eggs, while the other partner goes to sea to feed. The Adelies have worn highways into the snow and ice, smooth paths trampled by thousands of webbed feet, walking the same route day after day, from the sea to the nests, from the nests to the sea, back and forth, back and forth. A returning adult waddles up the beach with its belly full, head low, flippers held slightly out for balance. It climbs the slope, stepping carefully over rocks and puddles of meltwater, calling as it approaches its nesting territory. Its mate answers from the nest, standing and stretching, ready to hand over incubation duties. They bow to each other, a quick ritual greeting, and then trade places. The adult that has been sitting for hours or days steps off the nest, stretches its flippers wide and heads down the slope toward the water, ready to dive and feed and return again. The chicks are hatching now, tiny grey bundles of down, still damp from the egg, huddled against a parent's belly for warmth. They are helpless, unable to regulate their own temperature, dependent entirely on the adults for food and protection. The parents take turns brooding and foraging. When an adult returns from the sea, it regurgitates partially digested krill into the chick's mouth, feeding by feel, responding to the chick's begging call and the way it nudges and pushes against the adult's throat. The chick grows quickly, doubling in size every few days, demanding more and more food as its metabolism roars. A short distance away, on higher cliffs that catch the wind and shed snow quickly, the chinstrap penguins have their own colony. They look similar to adelies, but with a distinctive black line running under the chin like a helmet strap. They nest on narrow ledges and steep slopes where the footing is treacherous and the wind is constant. They climb with a combination of hopping, scrambling and sheer determination, using their flippers for balance and their stiff tails as props. It looks awkward, almost comical, but they are perfectly adapted to this terrain. The steep cliffs keep them safe from some predators and give them a clear view of the ocean below, where they will spend most of their lives once the breeding season ends. Both species follow the same basic pattern. Arrive in early spring when the ice is still thick. Claim a nest site, often the same one used in previous years. Court, mate, lay eggs. Incubate for about a month, trading shifts so each adult gets time to feed. Hatch the chicks and feed them constantly through the short summer. Watch the chicks grow and form creches. Large groups of young birds huddled together for warmth while both parents go to sea to gather enough food to keep up with demand. Then, as the summer fades and the ice begins to return, the chicks fledge, trading their grey down for waterproof feathers, and head to sea for the first time. The adults molt, coming ashore to replace their entire plumage in one exhausting process that leaves them flightless and vulnerable for a few weeks. And then, when the new feathers have grown in, they return to the ocean, scattering across the feeding grounds, becoming solitary swimmers in vast waters until the next spring calls them back to the same beaches, the same cliffs, the same nest sites. The camera lingers on the colony as the light shifts. Chicks begging, adults calling, waves breaking on the beach. A skua flies overhead, a large brown gull-like bird, scanning for unguarded eggs or the weak chicks. The penguins ignore it unless it gets too close. Then they lunge and snap, driving it away with sharp bills and angry vocalizations. Life is busy here, dense and loud and full of small dramas, but the overall tone remains calm. This is simply what happens every summer. This is the rhythm: lay, incubate, feed, grow, molt, return. The same cycle repeated by millions of birds across dozens of colonies scattered along the Antarctic coast. Now we travel north, following the cold currents up into the subantarctic, to islands that lie between the ice and the temperate zones. The air is warmer here, the summers longer, and some of the slopes are covered in tussock grass instead of snow. This is the realm of the gentoo penguin, a larger species with a bright orange bill and a white patch that sweeps back across the top of the head like a bonnet. They are elegant in the water, fast and agile, and slightly clumsy on land, waddling with a rolling gait that somehow conveys both effort and grace. The colony is spread across a beach and the low hills behind it. The nests are mounds of pebbles and vegetation, each pair carefully arranged and defended. Gentoos are particular about their nests. They steal pebbles from each other when the opportunity arises, carrying them one at a time in their bills, adding them to the pile, rearranging them just so. A bird will stand at its nest and survey the surrounding area, then dart over to a neighbour's nest, snatch a pebble, and hurry back before the neighbour can react. Sometimes they get caught. A brief scuffle, a lot of noise, and then everything settles back to normal. The pebbles matter. A well-built nest keeps the eggs off the cold, wet ground and helps with drainage during rain. The beach is alive with activity. Adults returning from the sea burst out of the waves, shaking water from their feathers, and hurry up the beach toward their nests. Others are heading down, running with a low posture, flippers tight against their bodies, building speed until they hit the water and dive cleanly under the first wave. They are fast swimmers, capable of reaching speeds that would be impressive for a fish. Underwater they fly, using their flippers as wings and their feet as rudders, twisting and turning with precision, pursuing small fish through the kelp forests and open water just offshore. The camera follows one bird as it dives. The surface light fades quickly, turning green and dim. The penguin strokes downward with powerful wing beats, each stroke propelling it forward in a smooth glide. Schools of fish scatter as it approaches, flashing silver in the murky light. The penguin adjusts its trajectory, angles upward, and snaps a fish out of the water column with a quick sideways strike. It swallows the fish whole and continues hunting, diving deeper, moving through the water with an ease and confidence that is completely absent on land. This is its element. This is where penguins make their living, in the cold, dim waters of the Southern Ocean, chasing prey that moves fast and hides well. After several minutes, the bird surfaces, takes a breath, and dives again, and again. Each dive lasts a minute or two, followed by a few seconds at the surface to breathe and orient. The cycle repeats until the bird's stomach is full, and then it turns back towards shore, swimming fast just below the surface, following the slope of the seafloor and the sound of waves breaking on rock. Back on land, the chicks are growing. Gentoo chicks are covered in grey-brown down, round and fluffy, with oversized feet and a constant hunger. They follow their parents around the nest area, begging with high-pitched calls and jabbing at the adult's bill. The adult responds by bending down and regurgitating a slurry of partially digested fish. The chick eats eagerly, sometimes shoving its entire head into the adult's mouth, trying to get every last bit. When the meal is done, the chick settles down, preens a few feathers, and waits for the next feeding. The adults come and go, trading shifts, bringing food, maintaining the nest, always busy. The wind picks up. Clouds roll in from the west, low and grey, trailing curtains of rain. The penguins do not seem to mind. They are waterproof, after all, built to spend their lives in and around water. The rain beads up on their feathers and rolls off. They shake occasionally, sending a spray of droplets into the air, and continue with their routines. Nest building, feeding, preening, sleeping, standing up with their heads tucked under a flipper. The rhythm continues regardless of weather. Higher up the coast, on cliffs that rise straight out of the ocean, the rockhopper penguins have made their home. They are smaller than gentoos, about 2 feet tall, with spiky yellow and black crests that stick up from their heads like wild eyebrows. They are named for the way they move on land, hopping from rock to rock with both feet together, using their powerful legs and stiff tails to navigate terrain that seems impossible for a bird. They live in places where waves crash directly against the cliffs, where landing means timing your exit from the water perfectly to avoid being smashed against the rocks. The camera watches as a group of rock hoppers approaches the shore. They swim just below the surface, riding the swells, waiting for the right moment. A large wave builds, lifting them up, and they surge forward with it, popping out of the water onto a slick, algae-covered rock just as the wave breaks around them. They land awkwardly, flippers out for balance, and immediately start hopping upward, away from the next wave. Hop, hop, hop. They bounce up a series of rocky steps, sometimes slipping, sometimes scrambling with both flippers and feet, always moving upward. It takes several minutes to climb 50 feet. They do it multiple times a day, every day, throughout the breeding season. The colony is loud and crowded, packed onto narrow ledges and small patches of flat ground between boulders. The nests are simple scrapes, barely more than a depression with a few pebbles, but each one is fiercely defended. Rockhoppers are aggressive, quick to lunge and jab at neighbours who get too close. They argue constantly, a cacophony of braying calls that echo off the cliffs and mix with the sound of waves and wind. Despite the chaos, they are successful. The cliffs protect them from most land predators, and the rich feeding grounds offshore provide plenty of food. Rockhoppers dive deep, sometimes descending more than 300 feet in search of krill, squid, and small fish. They hunt in areas where strong currents upwell from the ocean floor, bringing nutrients and prey to the surface. They travel far from the colony, sometimes covering dozens of miles in a single foraging trip, following invisible highways of current and temperature that lead them to the best fishing spots. The chicks hatch small and vulnerable, just like all penguin chicks, covered in brown-grey down that does nothing to repel water. They stay close to the adults, sheltering under their bodies, waiting to be fed. The adults return from the sea with crops full of krill, glowing pink-orange from the shrimp-like crustaceans they have swallowed whole. They regurgitate this bounty into the chicks' mouths, and the chicks grow quickly, adding weight and size every day. In a few weeks they will be nearly as large as the adults, still covered in down but strong enough to stand on their own, forming small groups with other chicks, while both parents go to sea at the same time to maximise feeding efficiency. The documentary takes us underwater again, this time in deeper, darker water far from shore. This is the open ocean. the territory that belongs to all penguins but is seen by few humans. The camera drifts through blue-green twilight, following a single bird as it hunts. The penguin strokes steadily downward, past 50 feet, past 100, into a zone where the light is faint and diffuse. Its eyes adjust, pupils wide, capturing every photon. It sees movement, a flicker in the gloom, and accelerates toward it. A school of small fish scatters, and the penguin follows, twisting left and right, snapping its bill, catching one fish then another. Its body is a hunting machine, dense bones that reduce buoyancy, making it easier to dive deep. Powerful pectoral muscles that drive the flippers in rapid strokes, a layer of fat that insulates against the cold and provides energy for long periods without food. Penguins can stay underwater for minutes at a time, holding their breath while they hunt, conserving oxygen by slowing their heart rate and shunting blood away from non-essential organs. They store oxygen in their blood and muscles more efficiently than most birds, allowing them to dive deeper and stay down longer than seems possible for an air-breathing animal. They navigate by memory and by sensing subtle changes in light, current, and the Earth's magnetic field. They know where they are, even in featureless water, and they know how to get back to the colony when their hunting is done. The bird surfaces, breathes and dives again. Dive, glide, turn, rise, breathe. The rhythm is hypnotic, repeated over and over as the bird fills its stomach. Finally, with its crop full and its belly heavy, it turns toward shore. It swims steadily, rising toward the surface, breaking through into air and light, and begins the journey back to the colony, back to the nest, back to the chick that is waiting and hungry. Above water, the focus shifts to the life cycle, the endless repeating pattern that defines penguin existence. Eggs are laid, usually 2 per nest for most species, though emperors lay only 1 and take turns in a different way, passing the egg between male and female as the seasons change. The eggs are incubated for weeks, kept warm by contact with the parent's brood patch, a section of belly skin rich with blood vessels. The parents take turns, one sitting while the other feeds, switching off every few days or every few weeks depending on the species and the distance to good feeding grounds. When the chicks hatch, they are helpless, tiny, covered in down that provides some insulation but no waterproofing. They cannot survive on their own. They depend entirely on their parents for warmth, for protection, for food. The adults feed them by regurgitation, bringing up partially digested fish, krill or squid from deep in their stomachs. The chicks beg with open mouths and persistent calls, and the adults respond, bending down, opening their bills, letting the food flow out. It is not graceful, but it works. The chicks grow quickly, doubling and tripling in size, their metabolisms racing to build the body mass they will need to survive their first winter at sea. As the chicks grow, they begin to gather in groups called creches, especially in larger colonies where density is high and predators are a constant threat. The creche is a defensive formation, a huddle of chicks packed together for warmth and safety while both parents go out to feed at the same time. The chicks stay close, moving as a group, watching for predators like skuas, gulls or giant petrels that might swoop down and try to snatch a straggler. The adults return from the sea and find their own chicks within the creche by voice and by scent, calling out and listening for the response, following the sound until they reconnect. It seems impossible, picking out one voice among hundreds, but it works. Parent and chick recognize each other and the feeding continues. The camera pulls back, showing the colony from above. Hundreds, thousands of birds, each one engaged in the same basic tasks. Defending a nest, feeding a chick, returning from the sea, walking to the water. The colony is a living system, dense and complex, but governed by simple rules. Cooperate where cooperation helps. Defend where defense is necessary. Feed your offspring. Survive long enough to breed again next year. The view expands further, pulling back from the single colony to show the entire coastline, then the entire continent, then the ocean surrounding it. Antarctica, the Falklands, South Georgia, Heard Island, Macquarie Island, the coasts of South America, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. Penguin colonies are scattered across all of these places, from the high Antarctic to temperate beaches, each species adapted to its particular niche, and connecting them all, invisible but powerful, are the ocean currents. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current is the largest current on Earth, a river of cold water that flows eastward around the continent, driven by wind and the rotation of the planet. It connects the Atlantic, Pacific and Indian Oceans, mixing water masses, transporting nutrients, creating upwelling zones where deep water rises to the surface and blooms with life. This current is a highway for penguins. They follow it, riding the cold water to feeding grounds hundreds or thousands of miles from their breeding colonies. Different species use different parts of the current, feeding at different depths, targeting different prey, but they are all tied to the same system. Emperors hunt along the edge of the sea ice, diving deep beneath the frozen surface to catch fish and squid. Adelies and chinstraps stay closer to the coast, feeding in the krill swarms that gather near the ice edge in summer. Gentoos hunt in shallower water, often near kelp forests and rocky reefs. Rockhoppers venture into the open ocean, diving deep in search of squid and lanternfish. Each species has its own strategy, its own set of adaptations, but they are all part of the same web, all dependent on the productivity of the cold southern waters. The seasons turn. Spring brings the penguins to shore, gathering at colonies to breed. Summer is a frenzy of feeding and chick rearing, the adults making countless trips from sea to shore and back, pushing themselves to the edge of exhaustion to keep their offspring alive. Fall brings the fledging of the chicks, the end of the breeding season, and the beginning of the molt. Molting is a vulnerable time. Penguins come ashore and stand still for 2 or 3 weeks, while every feather on their body falls out and is replaced. They cannot swim during this time, cannot feed, and must rely entirely on the fat reserves they built up before coming ashore. They stand in loose groups, looking ragged and miserable, feathers falling like snow around them, new feathers growing in beneath. When the molt is complete and the new plumage is waterproof, they return to the sea, leaving the colonies empty and quiet. Winter is spent at sea, often far from land. The birds disperse, travelling alone or in small groups, following the currents and the prey, diving and feeding and resting on the water. They are harder to study during this time, harder to track, but satellite tags and time depth recorders have revealed some of their secrets. They dive thousands of times, covering hundreds of miles, staying at sea for months without ever touching land. This is the hidden part of the penguin year, the time when they are just small shapes in vast waters, anonymous and free. The documentary touches briefly on change. The ocean is warming, though not uniformly. In some areas, the sea ice is retreating, changing the timing of the seasons and the distribution of prey. In other areas, the ice is more variable, breaking up earlier some years, staying late in others. Scientists monitor the colonies, counting nests, banding birds, measuring breeding success. Penguins are sensitive indicators of ocean health, responding quickly to changes in food availability, water temperature, and ice cover. When the krill populations shift, the penguins notice. When the sea ice forms late, the emperors notice. When storms become more frequent, the colonies notice. But the tone remains calm, observational. These are changes happening on a timescale longer than a single season, longer than a single penguin lifetime. The birds respond as they have always responded, by adapting where they can, by moving to new areas, by adjusting their timing. Some colonies shrink, others grow. The overall population fluctuates, but the penguins remain. They have survived ice ages and warm periods, rising seas and falling seas, changes in predator populations and prey distributions. They are resilient, shaped by millions of years of evolution in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. Researchers continue their work, travelling to remote colonies, enduring the same cold and wind that the penguins endure, recording data, taking photographs, collecting samples. They work quietly, trying not to disturb, trying to understand. The goal is not to control or to fix, but simply to witness, to document, to learn. And in learning, to perhaps find ways to protect, to preserve, to ensure that these birds and the ocean they depend on remain healthy and wild. The documentary returns to the ice one last time. Night has fallen again, a clear, calm night under a sky full of stars. The Milky Way arches overhead, bright and dense, its light reflecting faintly on the snow and ice. Open leads of water between the ice floes are perfectly still, mirroring the stars, creating the illusion that the penguins are standing between two skies. The emperors are huddling again, a slow, patient mass of birds enduring another night, another week, another month of winter. The adelies are asleep on their nests, heads tucked under flippers, conserving heat through the cold hours. The chinstraps are perched on their cliffs, motionless, waiting for dawn. The gentoos are scattered across their beach, resting between foraging trips. The rockhoppers are packed onto their ledges, braced against the wind that never stops blowing. The narrator's voice softens, becomes almost a whisper. Wherever they live, from the coldest ice to temperate coasts, penguins share the same pattern. Gather, breed, dive, feed, raise young, molt, return to the sea. It is a cycle as old as the species, repeated year after year, generation after generation. It is not easy. It is not safe, but it works. The penguins endure, they adapt, they survive. The camera lifts slowly, rising above the colony, above the ice, above the clouds. The colonies shrink to small dark dots on a white landscape, then disappear entirely as the view expands to show the curve of the earth, the swirl of clouds, the dark ocean, the bright ice. The narrator reminds us that as we sleep, the world's penguins will continue their quiet march through snow, sea, and starlight. They will huddle against the cold, they will dive into dark water, they will return to shore with food for their young. They will preen their feathers and call to their mates and stand watch over their nests. They will live the way they have always lived, in rhythm with the ocean and the seasons, part of a pattern larger and older than any individual bird. The sound of waves fades, the wind quiets, the screen darkens, and the story ends as it began with the slow rotation of the earth, the cold southern ocean, and the birds that have made it their home. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. Lie down now and let your breathing slow. Close your eyes and picture Earth from far away, a sphere of blue and white turning slowly in the darkness of space, small enough to hold in your mind but vast enough to contain oceans, mountains, and every life that has ever stirred on its surface. Tonight, we're not here to speak of disaster or fear. We're here to listen to something quieter, something that unfolds over centuries rather than seconds. We're here to understand how the planet breathes. Earth is not still, it never has been. Beneath the oceans and continents, beneath the forests and cities and farmland, the ground itself is moving, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but moving nonetheless. The largest earthquakes in history, the ones that shifted coastlines and changed the shape of the seafloor, are not anomalies or accidents. They are moments when the planet takes a deep, shuddering breath after holding it for decades or centuries. They are adjustments, realignments, the inevitable result of forces that have been building in silence since long before any of us were born. We will drift tonight across the globe, visiting a few of these places where Earth has breathed most deeply. We'll trace coastlines and trenches, mountains and ocean floors. We'll move slowly because that's the only way to understand what's happening. These are not stories of sudden violence, but of patience, of rock bending for generations, of shorelines tilting inch by inch, of tension accumulating in the dark until the moment when it can no longer hold. And then, in a span of minutes, sometimes seconds, everything that has been building releases, and the world adjusts itself once more. The planet's outer shell is not a single solid piece. Instead, it's broken into enormous sections called tectonic plates. Vast rafts of rock, some carrying continents, others supporting ocean basins, all floating on deeper layers that are hotter and softer, flowing in currents too slow to see but powerful enough to move mountains. These plates drift across the surface like slow boats on a thick sea. Where they meet, remarkable things happen. Some slide past each other, grinding edges in long, creaking faults. Others collide head-on, crumpling and thickening into mountain ranges that rise centimetre by centimetre each year. And in other places, one plate dives beneath another, sinking into the hot interior of the planet in a process called subduction. It's at these subduction zones where the largest earthquakes occur. Imagine two enormous plates meeting at an angle, one sliding beneath the other and descending into the heat below. The top plate should be sliding smoothly over the descending one, accommodating the motion without resistance. But that's not what happens. Instead, the plates lock together. Their rough edges catch and hold, like two pieces of wood pressed together with just enough friction to keep them from moving. Meanwhile, deeper down, the descending plate keeps pushing forward, dragging the edge of the upper plate downward, bending it, warping it, storing energy in the deformation like a slowly bent wooden ruler or a rubber band stretched tighter and tighter. This can go on for decades, for centuries. On the surface, nothing seems amiss. The sun rises and sets, tides come and go, people build homes, plant crops, watch their children grow. But deep below, in the darkness of the crust, stress accumulates. The bent edge of the plate pulls downward, and the land above it may tilt slightly, so gradually that no one notices. Shorelines may sink a few centimetres over a generation. Mountains may rise a little faster on the other side of the boundary. All of this happens in silence, invisible unless you're measuring carefully with instruments. And then, one day, the lock breaks. The friction that has held the plates together for so long suddenly fails. The bent plate springs back toward its original position, surging upward and seaward in a motion that might cover meters in just a minute or two. This is an earthquake, the sudden release of all that stored energy, all that slow, invisible bending finally letting go. Let's drift now down to the west coast of South America, to a place where one of the greatest of these releases occurred. Picture the coastline of Chile at twilight, long beaches stretching for hundreds of kilometers, cold Pacific fog rolling in over the water, and behind it all, the Andes Mountains rising like a massive wall, their peaks catching the last light of the sun. This is a land shaped by collision. Just offshore, hidden beneath the ocean, lies the Peru-Chile Trench, one of the deepest gouges in the seafloor. Here, the Nazca Plate, a section of oceanic crust beneath the eastern Pacific, is diving beneath the South American plate, descending into the mantle at a rate of about 7 centimeters per year, roughly as fast as a fingernail grows. For centuries before 1960, this boundary had been locked. The Nazca Plate continued to push forward, but its upper edge was stuck against the base of South America, dragging the continent's edge downward, bending it, loading it with strain. Inland, the Andes continued their slow rise, pushed upward by the collision. Beaches along the coast may have been sinking slightly, so gradually that no one would have noticed without precise measurements. The land was being deformed, warped over a vast area, all in preparation for a moment that no one could predict. In May of 1960, the lock finally broke. Along a stretch of coastline more than 800 kilometers long, a distance greater than from San Francisco to Los Angeles, the boundary between the plates suddenly gave way. The bent edge of South America sprang upward and westward, releasing in mere minutes the strain that had accumulated over centuries. The magnitude was recorded as 9.5, the largest instrumentally measured earthquake in human history. But we're not here to recount the chaos that followed. We're here to understand the motion itself, the way the continent lurched seaward, the way the seafloor rose, the way the shape of the coastline changed in an instant. After the shaking stopped, after the ocean had settled and the aftershocks had faded, the land was different. Some areas had risen by meters, others had sunk. The coastline had a new configuration, and deep below, the plates had found a new temporary equilibrium. The Nazca Plate continues to dive beneath South America even now, and somewhere along that boundary, new sections are locking, bending, storing energy for the next great release, decades or centuries from now. The Andes continue to rise, the trench continues to deepen, Earth continues its slow work of reshaping itself. Now we drift northward, following the rim of the Pacific Ocean, that vast ring where so many plates converge and dive. We arrive at the coast of Alaska on a winter evening, steep forested hills rising straight from the water, fjords cutting deep into the land, icy peaks glowing faintly in the long twilight. This is the edge of North America, but it's also the edge of a plate boundary. Here, the Pacific Plate is sliding beneath the North American Plate along the Aleutian subduction zone, a curving arc of trenches and islands stretching from the Alaska Peninsula out toward Russia. For decades before 1964, the same process was unfolding here as in Chile. The descending Pacific Plate was locked against the base of North America, dragging parts of the Alaskan coast downward. Some shorelines tilted almost imperceptibly, small islands and coastal marshes slowly sank. Trees that once stood well above high tide found their roots increasingly flooded. All of this happened quietly, with no earthquakes, no warnings, just the slow, steady bending of the crust under invisible stress. On a Friday afternoon in March of 1964, the boundary slipped. Along a stretch of more than 600 kilometres, from Prince William Sound down to the Kodiak Islands, the plate suddenly released. The magnitude was 9.2, the second largest earthquake ever recorded. The bent portion of the crust sprang back upward and seaward. In some places, the land rose by more than 10 metres, 30 feet, almost instantly. In other areas, the land dropped by a metre or two. The seafloor shifted. Islands changed shape. Coastlines that had been slowly sinking for generations were suddenly thrust high above the waves. What's remarkable, if you step back and look at the aftermath with patience, is not the destruction, but the transformation. Imagine walking along a beach after the earthquake and finding barnacles and mussels clinging to rocks 10 metres above the waterline, suddenly stranded in air, dying in the sun because the land beneath them had lifted so quickly. Imagine marshes that had been dry land now flooded because the ground had dropped and the tide now reached farther inland. The earthquake was not an event separate from the land. It was the land itself adjusting, finding a new shape, releasing the bend that had been imposed on it by the relentless push of the Pacific Plate. And just as in Chile, the process continues. The Pacific Plate is still diving beneath Alaska, still moving forward a few centimetres each year. New sections of the boundary are now locked, bending, accumulating strain. The mountains of the Alaska Range continue to rise. The fjords continue to deepen. Glaciers carve the peaks. Rivers carry sediment to the sea, and beneath it all the crust is slowly preparing for its next breath. We cross the Pacific now, drifting over vast stretches of open water, above undersea mountain ranges and trenches deeper than any canyon on land. We arrive at the warm tropical waters off the coast of Sumatra, where the air is humid and the ocean a deep, saturated blue. Palm trees line the coasts of islands scattered across the sea. Coral reefs glow in the shallows. It feels peaceful, timeless, a place where the rhythms of life are governed by monsoons and tides rather than the grinding of rock miles below. But beneath this calm surface, another plate boundary runs parallel to the coast. The Indian-Australian Plate, a massive section of crust carrying much of the Indian Ocean, is sliding northeastward and diving beneath the Sunda Plate, which supports Sumatra, Java, and much of Southeast Asia. The boundary between them is marked by a deep trench running for thousands of kilometres along the ocean floor. Here, as in Chile and Alaska, the descending plate has been pushing forward steadily, while parts of its upper edge have been locked against the base of the Sunda Plate. For centuries before December 2004, this lock held. The Indian-Australian Plate continued to advance, dragging the edge of the Sunda Plate downward, bending it, tilting the seafloor. GPS stations on islands near the coast, if they had existed a century earlier, would have recorded slow, steady motion, millimetres per year, hardly noticeable, but accumulating. The land was being warped, the seafloor was being bent downward, and deep in the rock, stress was building. On the morning after Christmas in 2004, the lock broke. Along a section of the plate boundary stretching more than 1,200 kilometres, longer than California, the plate suddenly slipped. The bent portion of the Sunda Plate surged upward and westward, the seafloor rising by several metres in some places. The magnitude was somewhere between 9.1 and 9.3, one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded. The motion was so vast, the energy so immense, that it shifted the entire island of Sumatra several metres to the southwest and changed the rotation speed of the Earth by a tiny, measurable amount. But again, we're not here to focus on the chaos. We're here to watch the planet adjust. The rising seafloor displaced an enormous volume of water, sending waves radiating outward in all directions. After the waves had passed and the water returned to calm, the shape of the ocean floor had changed. The coastline had a new configuration. Coral reefs that had been submerged were now closer to the surface. Islands had shifted slightly. And deep below, the plate boundary had found a new temporary position. The stress released, the bending undone, for now. The Indian-Australian Plate continues to move northeast. The Sunda Plate continues to ride over it. New sections of the boundary are locking, new bends are forming, and in a century or two or three another section will slip, and the Earth will breathe again. We drift northeast now, along the curve of the Asian margin, past the Philippines and Taiwan, arriving at the islands of Japan. Here, mountains rise steeply from the sea, forests cover the slopes, rivers carve valleys through volcanic rock, and the coastline is intricate, folded into countless bays and headlands. Japan is a place built by plate tectonics, a chain of islands formed where the Pacific plate dives beneath the plate supporting Eastern Asia. The boundary between them is marked by the Japan Trench, a deep undersea chasm running parallel to the coast. For decades before March 2011, scientists in Japan had been watching this boundary carefully. They installed GPS stations, seismometers, tide gauges, and instruments on the seafloor to measure even the tiniest motions. They knew the Pacific plate was descending beneath Japan at a rate of about 8 centimeters per year. They knew that parts of the boundary had locked, that the edge of the overlying plate was being dragged down, bending, tilting, accumulating strain. They could see it in the data. Year after year, GPS stations on the coast moved slightly westward and downward, millimeters at a time, recording the slow deformation of the land. In the early afternoon of March 11, 2011, the lock broke. Along a segment of the trench stretching more than 400 kilometers, the plate slipped. The bent portion of the overlying plate lurched upward and eastward toward the ocean. The magnitude was 9.1. The seafloor rose by meters. The coastline moved several meters seaward in a matter of minutes. Instruments recorded the motion with extraordinary precision. GPS stations that had been creeping westward for decades suddenly jumped eastward. Tide gauges recorded the change in sea level. Seismometers captured the seismic waves radiating outward through the crust. What's remarkable about Japan in 2011 is not just the earthquake itself, but the fact that scientists could measure it so precisely. They could see, in real time and in the data afterward, exactly how much the crust had moved, how much stress had been released, how much bending had been undone. They could map the shape of the slip on the fault and estimate how much strain still remained in nearby sections. They could, in a sense, watch the planet breathe and record every detail of that breath. And as in every other place we've visited, the process continues. The Pacific plate is still diving beneath Japan. New sections of the boundary are locking. The mountains of the Japanese Alps continue to rise. Volcanoes continue to simmer, fed by the melting of the descending plate deep below. The coastline continues to evolve, shaped by the slow, relentless motion of the crust. Step back now and look at the pattern. Chile, Alaska, Sumatra, Japan. These are all places where one plate dives beneath another along a long curving trench. These are subduction zones, the places where Earth's largest earthquakes occur. Why here and not elsewhere? The answer lies in geometry and scale. Giant earthquakes need large areas where the crust can lock and bend over long distances. They need plate boundaries that extend for hundreds or thousands of kilometers. They need plates that are big enough, strong enough, and moving fast enough to accumulate enormous amounts of strain over centuries. This is why the largest earthquakes tend to cluster around the edges of the Pacific Ocean, forming what's sometimes called the Ring of Fire, a long curving chain of trenches, volcanoes and mountain ranges where plates converge and collide. It's also why you don't see magnitude 9 earthquakes along boundaries where plates slide past each other horizontally, like the San Andreas Fault in California. Those boundaries can produce damaging earthquakes, but they don't have the same geometry, the same ability to lock over vast areas and accumulate strain over huge sections of crust. The process is remarkably slow. Each year, plates move only as far as fingernails grow, a few centimeters at most. But over a century, that's several meters. Over 5 centuries, it's tens of meters. If a boundary remains locked for that long, the accumulated strain is immense. When it finally releases, the motion is correspondingly large, and the energy radiated as seismic waves is enough to be felt across entire continents. But because the process is slow, scientists can identify which zones are most likely to produce giant earthquakes. They can measure how fast plates are moving, which sections of boundaries have slipped recently, and which have been locked for a long time. They can estimate with varying degrees of confidence how much strain has accumulated and how much motion might occur when the lock finally breaks. They can't predict the exact day or hour, but they can say with some certainty that certain stretches of coastline are due for a major adjustment. This is not a cause for fear but for understanding. Earth is not attacking us. It is simply doing what it has always done, moving, adjusting, redistributing stress, reshaping its surface. The plates have been moving for billions of years, long before there were humans to notice. They will continue moving long after we're gone. Our task is not to stop them, we can't, but to learn to live with them, to understand their rhythms, to build in ways that acknowledge the reality of a planet that is never truly still. We have tools, now that our ancestors could not have imagined. Across the planet, thousands of seismometers listen constantly to the faint vibrations of the crust. Satellites orbit overhead, measuring the shape of the land with such precision that they can detect changes of a few millimeters. GPS stations track the slow drift of continents and the bending of coastlines. Ocean floor instruments measure pressure changes that hint at vertical motion of the seafloor. Together, these instruments form a kind of stethoscope pressed against the surface of the planet, listening to its heartbeat. And there is a heartbeat. Even when the ground feels perfectly still beneath your feet, it is alive with tiny tremors, microquakes, too small for people to feel but detectable by sensitive instruments. These tremors constantly ripple through the crust, marking the places where plates are moving, where faults are creeping, where stress is being released a little bit at a time. Scientists use these signals to map plate boundaries in extraordinary detail, to identify which segments have slipped recently and which are still locked, to estimate where the next major earthquake might occur. The goal is not to generate fear, but to generate preparedness. By understanding where and how large earthquakes are likely to happen, communities can build stronger structures, develop better warning systems, and plan for the adjustments that the planet will inevitably make. In Japan, for instance, buildings are designed to sway and flex during earthquakes, absorbing energy rather than resisting it. Early warning systems detect the first faint seismic waves from a distant earthquake and send alerts to cities farther away, giving people seconds or even minutes to take cover before the strongest shaking arrives. Coastal communities practice evacuation drills, rehearsing what to do if the ground starts moving and the ocean begins to pull back from the shore. None of this eliminates risk, but it reduces it. It transforms the relationship between people and the planet from one of helpless fear to one of informed respect. We are learning to listen to Earth's breathing, to recognize the signs of stress building in the crust, to understand that the ground beneath us is part of a much larger, much slower process. Zoom out once more and see the whole Earth turning slowly in space. Trace the mountain chains that mark ancient collisions, the Himalayas, where India is still pushing into Asia, the Alps, where Africa is colliding with Europe, the Andes, where the ocean floor dives beneath a continent. See the deep trenches that mark subduction zones, the Peru-Chile Trench, the Aleutian Trench, the Java Trench, the Japan Trench, the Mariana Trench. Deeper than Mount Everest is tall. See the wide ocean basins slowly changing shape as new crust forms at mid-ocean ridges, and old crust sinks back into the mantle at trenches. Without these motions, Earth would be a very different place. There would be no high mountain, ranges to catch moisture from the air and create rivers. There would be no volcanic islands rising from the sea, no fertile soils formed from weathered volcanic rock. The oceans would be shallow and stagnant, the continents flat and eroded. The slow churn of plate tectonics is what keeps the planet dynamic, what recycles rock and water and carbon, what creates the varied landscapes we know and love. Millions of people live along these active coastlines, in the shadow of these mountains, on the shores of these trenches. They accept the trade-off: rich fishing waters, mild climates shaped by ocean currents, dramatic scenery, access to geothermal energy, fertile soils, all in regions where the ground occasionally moves. It's a relationship, an accommodation, a recognition that we live on a planet that is not finished, that is still being shaped, still breathing. Think now about time itself, about the way we measure our lives in years and decades while the planet measures its life in millions and billions of years. A human lifetime is barely a flicker in geological time. The mountains we see as permanent, eternal, are actually young and growing. The Himalayas, the tallest range on Earth, began forming only about 50 million years ago when India collided with Asia, recent in planetary terms. They're still rising today, lifted by the same collision that created them, growing taller even as erosion wears them down. The balance between uplift and erosion determines their height. and that balance shifts over time, responding to changes in climate, in the angle of collision, in the speed at which the plates converge. The trenches too are temporary features, though they seem permanent to us. The Peru-Chile Trench has existed for tens of millions of years, but it has not always been in the same place, not always the same depth. As plates shift and boundaries migrate, trenches move, deepen, fill with sediment, and sometimes disappear entirely when the geometry of plate motion changes. The Pacific Ocean itself is slowly shrinking as its edges are consumed at subduction zones, while the Atlantic Ocean grows wider as new crust forms along the mid-Atlantic ridge. In 100 million years, the map of the world will look completely different. Continents will have moved thousands of kilometres, mountain ranges will have risen and eroded away, new trenches will have formed, and old ones will have vanished. This is the context in which we must understand earthquakes. They are not isolated events, but part of an ongoing transformation of the planet's surface. Each earthquake is a small adjustment in a much larger process, a momentary release of stress in a system that is constantly accumulating and redistributing strain. The largest earthquakes, the ones that shift coastlines and reshape seafloors, are simply the most dramatic expressions of this process, the moments when the planet's breathing becomes loud enough for us to hear. Consider the coastline of Chile again, that long, narrow country pressed between the Pacific Ocean and the Andes. Its entire history, its entire geography, is shaped by the subduction of the Nazca Plate beneath South America. The trench offshore is where old oceanic crust, formed millions of years ago at a mid-ocean ridge far to the west, returns to the mantle. As it descends, it carries with it water trapped in its minerals, water that was absorbed when the crust was young and near the surface. Deep below the Andes, that water is released as the crust heats up and melts, and the water lowers the melting point of the surrounding rock, creating magma that rises through the overlying plate to feed volcanoes. The volcanic peaks that dot the Andes, some active, some dormant, some long extinct, are all products of this process, monuments to the water that rode the descending plate into the depths. The earthquakes along the Chilean coast are part of the same system. The locked boundary prevents smooth subduction, so stress accumulates until the lock breaks and the plates lurch forward. The magma rising to feed volcanoes is generated by the same descending plate. The uplift of the Andes is driven by the collision. It's all connected, all part of the same grand process of one plate consuming another, of ocean crust returning to the mantle after a journey of millions of years. Alaska tells a similar story. The volcanoes of the Aleutian Islands, the earthquakes along the coast, the uplift of the mountains, all of these are connected to the subduction of the Pacific Plate beneath North America. The same is true in Sumatra, where the volcanic peaks of the island are fed by magma generated as the Indian-Australian Plate descends beneath the Sunda Plate. And in Japan, where the volcanic mountains of the island chain are supplied by the melting of the Pacific Plate as it sinks into the mantle. Everywhere we look along the Ring of Fire, we see the same pattern. Trenches, earthquakes, volcanoes, mountain building, all driven by the descent of oceanic crust into the depths. This is not a story of violence, but of transformation. The crust that forms at mid-ocean ridges is young, hot, and relatively light. As it moves away from the ridge, it cools and becomes denser, heavier. Eventually it becomes dense enough to sink back into the mantle at a subduction zone, completing the cycle. The journey from ridge to trench can take 100 million years or more. During that time, the crust may accumulate layers of sediment, may be dotted with volcanic islands, may host entire ecosystems on the seafloor. All of that is carried down into the trench, scraped off the descending plate, or dragged down into the heat below. Some of the sediment is scraped off and piled up along the edge of the upper plate, forming what geologists call an accretionary wedge, a chaotic mass of folded, compressed rock that grows over time as more material is added. Some sediment is carried all the way down into the mantle, where it melts and contributes to the magma that feeds volcanoes. And some of the descending plate itself melts, contributing elements that eventually make their way back to the surface through volcanic eruptions. It's a grand cycle of creation and destruction, of material moving from the surface to the depths and back again, over and over, for billions of years. The earthquakes are just one part of this cycle, but they're the part we notice most because they happen on human timescales. A volcanic eruption unfolds over days or weeks. An earthquake unfolds over seconds. Both are expressions of the same deep process, but the earthquake catches us by surprise because it's so sudden, so abrupt. Yet if we could speed up time and watch the crust over millions of years, we would see that earthquakes are just brief pulses in a much smoother, more gradual motion. The steady descent of one plate beneath another, occasionally punctuated by sudden lurches when the friction becomes too great to hold. Return now to the image of Earth from space, that blue and white sphere turning in the darkness. The lights of cities glow faintly along coastlines, tracing the edges of continents and the boundaries of plates. Most of the time, the planet seems perfectly still. Days pass, seasons change, generations come and go, and the ground feels solid and reliable beneath our feet. But deep below, the slow motion continues, plates drift, boundaries lock and bend, strain accumulates in the silence. And then, every few decades or centuries, the planet takes a breath. A boundary slips, a coastline shifts. The shape of the land changes in an instant, releasing the tension that has been building for so long. These are Earth's largest earthquakes, not disasters, not punishments, but adjustments, exhalations, the natural consequence of living on a planet that moves. We've travelled tonight to Chile, to Alaska, to Sumatra, to Japan, different shores, different cultures, different landscapes, but all touched by the same deep process. All places where the crust has bent and released, where the planet has breathed deeply and then settled back into its slow, steady rhythm. The earthquakes themselves last only minutes, but they are part of a cycle that spans centuries. They are brief moments in a much longer story, punctuation marks in a narrative that has been unfolding for billions of years. Breathe in slowly now, and imagine the Pacific plate sliding beneath Japan, millimetre by millimetre. Breathe out, and imagine the Nazca plate diving beneath South America century after century. Breathe in, and imagine the Indian-Australian plate pushing northeast beneath Sumatra. Breathe out, and imagine the slow rise of the Andes, the Himalayas, the Alps, mountains built over millions of years by the collision of plates, lifted grain by grain, shaped by the same forces that occasionally shake the ground. The planet breathes slowly. Its inhales and exhales are measured not in seconds, but in decades, in centuries, in millennia. And we, living our brief lives on its surface, can learn to breathe with it, to understand its rhythms, to respect its power, to find comfort in the knowledge that even the largest earthquakes are part of a process that is ancient, natural and ongoing. Picture the coastline of Chile at dawn, fog lifting from the water, the Andes catching the first light. Picture the fjords of Alaska, still and silent under the winter stars. Picture the coral reefs of Sumatra, glowing in the clear tropical water. Picture the mountains of Japan, covered in cherry blossoms in spring, snow in winter, forests in every season. These are places shaped by the breathing of the planet, landscapes that exist because the ground moves, because plates collide and dive, because the crust bends and releases. And tonight, as you lie here and let your own breathing slow, you can rest in the knowledge that the planet continues its work. Somewhere, deep beneath the ocean, a plate is descending into the mantle, melting, releasing water that will rise and feed a volcano. Somewhere, a boundary is locked, bending, storing energy for a release that might come tomorrow or a century from now. Somewhere, a mountain is rising, a millimetre each year, patient and unstoppable. Somewhere, a trench is deepening, collecting sediment washed down from the land, burying the history of the surface. Think of the rivers that carry sediment from the mountains to the sea, grain by grain, over thousands of years. Each particle of sand or silt was once part of a mountain peak, worn away by wind and rain, carried downhill by streams and rivers, deposited finally on the floor of the ocean. There it settles into layers, compacting over time, turning slowly into rock, and eventually those layers may be carried down into a trench by a descending plate, scraped off to form new land, or dragged down into the mantle to melt and become part of the magma that will one day erupt from a volcano and begin the cycle again. This is the work of the planet. Constant transformation, constant motion, constant exchange of material between the surface and the depths. The earthquakes are just moments when that transformation becomes sudden and visible, when we're reminded that the solid ground beneath us is actually part of a fluid system, moving and changing on timescales we struggle to comprehend. Picture now the deep ocean trenches, those dark chasms where the seafloor descends into darkness. No sunlight reaches the bottom of the deepest trenches. The pressure is immense, enough to crush most creatures and most human-made vessels. Yet even there, life exists. Strange, adapted organisms that thrive in conditions we would find unbearable. And even there, the planet is moving. The walls of the trench shift slightly with each earthquake. Sediment cascades down the slopes, and far below, kilometres beneath the seafloor, one plate continues its slow descent into the mantle, carrying with it everything that rests on its surface. Think of the history contained in that descending plate. Rock that formed at a mid-ocean ridge 100 million years ago. Layers of sediment deposited over tens of millions of years, each layer a snapshot of ocean conditions at the time it was laid down. Fossils of ancient marine organisms, their shells settling to the seafloor and being compressed into limestone. Volcanic ash from eruptions long forgotten. All of this is being carried into the depths, heated, compressed, transformed. Some of it will melt, some will be incorporated into new rock, and some, perhaps, will eventually make its way back to the surface through volcanic eruptions, completing a journey that spans hundreds of millions of years. The waves continue to wash the shorelines, carrying their rhythm from the open ocean to the sand and rock. The mountains continue to catch the first light of morning and the last light of evening, standing as they have for millions of years, as they will for millions more. The trenches rest in darkness, deep and cold and silent, marking the places where the surface of the planet returns to the interior, where the cycle begins again. Earth is not still. It never has been. But its motion is so slow, so patient, that we can live our entire lives without feeling more than a faint tremble now and then. We can build homes, plant gardens, raise children, watch the seasons turn, all on a surface that is drifting, bending, adjusting beneath us. And when the planet does take one of its deep, shuddering breaths, when a boundary slips and a coastline shifts, we can understand it not as an attack, but as a reminder. We live on a planet that is alive in its own way, that has its own rhythms, its own needs, its own long, slow story. So let your breathing match that rhythm now. Slow inhales, slow exhales, imagining the patient movement of rock beneath the ocean, the gradual rise of mountains, the quiet accumulation of strain in the darkness. The planet is breathing, the plates are moving, the continents are drifting, and you, lying here in the safety of this moment, can let go, can trust that the ground will hold you, can fall asleep knowing that Earth's adjustments, however dramatic they may seem, are simply part of the way the world works, part of the way it has always worked, part of the way it will always work, for as long as there is a planet turning in the darkness of space. The stars wheel overhead, distant and constant, while beneath you the planet turns, carrying you with it through the night. The same forces that built the mountains and carved the trenches are at work now, this very moment, though they move too slowly for you to feel. The same process that caused the great earthquakes of the past is preparing, somewhere, for the great earthquakes of the future. But tonight, in this moment, all is still. The planet holds you gently as you drift towards sleep, and in your dreams, perhaps, you'll see it as it truly is. Not a static ball of rock, but a living, breathing world, forever changing, forever adjusting, forever turning in the ancient dark. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. Lie back now and let your body settle. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and imagine with me a warm, humid night settling over a southern swamp. The air is thick and soft against your skin, carrying the faint scent of mud and green things growing. Crickets are calling in waves, their rhythm rising and falling like gentle breathing. Somewhere in the distance a frog offers a low resonant call, then another answers. The reeds at the water's edge rustle with the smallest breeze, a whisper of movement in the darkness. Mist is beginning to curl off the surface of the water, thin threads of vapour rising into the cooler air above. Moonlight catches the still surface in long silver stripes, breaking and reforming as the water barely moves. Everything here is slow, everything here is patient. And there, along the muddy bank where water meets land, a single alligator lies almost perfectly still. Half of its body rests on the soft mud, the other half submerged in the dark water. Only its eyes break the surface, positioned just above the waterline, catching the faint light like two ancient stones. This creature will be our guide tonight, not with movement or sound, but simply by existing as it has existed, as its ancestors have existed, for an almost unimaginable span of time. This slow, silent animal resting in the shallows is part of a lineage that watched the age of dinosaurs come to an end. It survived when most of the giant reptiles vanished from the earth. It endured ice ages and heat waves, the shifting of continents, and the rising and falling of seas. And here it remains, unchanged in all the ways that truly matter, a living connection to epochs so distant they feel like dreams. Let yourself drift closer in your mind's eye, moving through the warm night air until you can see this alligator in greater detail. Notice the armoured scales covering its body, each one a small shield of bone covered in thick skin, overlapping like the work of an ancient craftsman. The tail extends behind, broad and muscular, a powerful paddle capable of sudden explosive force but now lying utterly relaxed. The snout is wide and rounded, studded with sensors that can detect the smallest ripple, the faintest pressure change in the water. And those eyes, those remarkable eyes, sit on top of the head in perfect placement, allowing the animal to see while the rest of its body remains hidden below the surface. The nostrils, too, are positioned at the very tip of the snout, meaning this creature can float almost entirely underwater and still breathe, still watch, still wait. Every part of this body is built for patience, every feature serves efficiency. The thick skin acts as living armour, protecting against threats but also holding in moisture during dry times. The heart beats slowly, conserving energy, sometimes pausing for long seconds between beats when the animal dives. The muscles are dense and powerful, but spend most of their existence in complete relaxation, coiled, potential that may not be needed for hours or even days. This alligator can wait in one place, barely moving, for longer than most animals could imagine remaining still. It can lower its metabolism, slow its breathing, and enter a state of such profound rest that it seems almost part of the landscape itself. Another log, another dark shape in the water, nothing worth noticing. Watch as it floats now, letting air fill its lungs just enough to maintain neutral buoyancy. It sinks a fraction of an inch, then rises again with the next slow breath, a rhythm as gentle as sleep itself. The water laps softly against its scales. A small fish swims past unaware, and the alligator makes no move. Not yet, not unless necessary. This is the secret, you see, the ancient wisdom encoded in scale and bone and slow-beating heart. Use as little energy as possible. Move only when movement serves you. Wait, and let the world come to you. This strategy, this patient approach to existence, is what allowed the ancestors of this alligator to outlast creatures far larger, far more active, far more spectacular in their glory. While other animals raced and fought and burned through energy in the constant drama of survival, these low-slung hunters perfected the art of doing almost nothing, almost perfectly. Now let us glide backward through time together, moving in our imagination away from this present moment, this modern swamp with its distant highway sounds and airplane lights crossing the stars. We'll keep this same location, this same wet country, but we'll peel away the layers of human presence. The roads fade, the farms disappear, the towns and cities dissolve like mist. The trees shift and change, the cypresses and tupelos giving way to different species, then different forests entirely, then plants no human has ever seen alive. We're going back through thousands of years, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and still further until we reach a time millions of years distant. The swamp remains. Different in detail but the same in essence. A warm, wet place where water and land blur together, where plants grow thick and tall, where the air hangs heavy with moisture. And here, in these prehistoric wetlands, we find the early cousins of our modern alligator. They are smaller than some of their descendants will be, but the basic design is already there. Low bodies, armoured skin, powerful tails, eyes and nostrils positioned for surface breathing. They lie along riverbanks exactly as our alligator lies now. They slide into murky water without a ripple. They wait beside fallen logs and overhanging branches for fish to swim past, for small reptiles to come down to drink, for anything careless enough to venture within range of those devastating jaws. All around them, giants walk the earth. Massive dinosaurs thunder through forests. Long-necked sauropods browse the highest branches. Swift predators pursue their prey across open ground. The world of the dinosaurs is dramatic, dynamic, filled with creatures of enormous size and spectacular form. But down here in the water, our ancestors simply wait. They don't compete directly with the giants. They occupy a different space, hunt different prey, follow different rules. While the dinosaurs above need constant food to fuel their massive bodies and maintain their warm-blooded metabolisms, these low-slung water dwellers can eat a large meal and then fast for weeks. They can slow themselves down. They can wait out difficult times by simply stopping, resting, barely living until conditions improve. The pattern repeats day after day, year after year, millennium after millennium. Lie in wait along the riverbank, ambush fish and small animals, slide silently into water when threatened, bask in warm sun when it's available, dig into mud during dry seasons, return when the rains come. This sit-and-wait lifestyle works so well, is so perfectly suited to the environment of warm wetlands, that nature simply keeps it, era after era, with only minor adjustments. The basic body plan proves to be robust, reliable, almost ideal for the niche it fills. Time passes in long, slow waves. Millions of years flow by like water itself. And then, one distant day, something changes. High above the earth, tumbling through the cold dark of space, a mountain of rock and metal falls toward our planet. It has been falling for a very long time, crossing distances that seem infinite. And now its journey ends. The asteroid strikes the Earth with a force beyond imagination. If we were there, if we could see it from a great distance, we might notice a flash on the horizon, bright as a second sun. Then waves begin crossing the prehistoric seas, massive surges of water racing outward from the impact site. Dust and debris rise into the sky, enormous clouds of pulverized rock that begin to spread, carried by winds dimming the light. But we're telling this as a story from long ago, something that has already happened and passed. There's no need for fear or alarm in the retelling. This is simply what occurred, a moment in the Earth's long history, and we're here now to understand how life responded, how some creatures endured while others could not. The days after the impact grow dark. Dust fills the upper atmosphere, blocking sunlight, causing temperatures to drop. Plants that depend on photosynthesis begin to struggle. When the plants suffer, the herbivores that eat them suffer too, and when the herbivores decline, the predators that hunt them face starvation. For the large dinosaurs, especially those living on land, this becomes an impossible problem. Their massive bodies require constant feeding. They need warmth from the sun or from their own metabolism. When both food and warmth become scarce, when weeks turn to months of diminished sunlight and failing plant life, their great size becomes a liability. They cannot afford to wait. They cannot slow down enough to survive on scraps, one by one. The giants fall. But down in the water, in the rivers and swamps and coastal marshes, a different story unfolds. Here, our alligators' ancestors do what they have always done best. They slow down. Their bodies, built for efficiency, drop into lower and lower states of activity. Their hearts beat slower. Their breathing becomes shallow. They sink into the mud, into sheltered pools, into any protected space they can find. When food is scarce, they simply stop eating. Days pass, weeks pass. Their metabolism drops so low that they need almost nothing to keep living, just a bare trickle of energy to maintain the most essential functions, and they can eat almost anything. When fish become scarce, they'll take carrion, the bodies of animals that didn't survive floating in the water or washed up on shores. They'll eat each other if absolutely necessary, the smaller and weaker falling to the larger and stronger, a grim but effective way of concentrating scarce resources. They'll consume rotting vegetation, insects, anything that provides even a small amount of nutrition. There is no pride in this, no nobility, just the bare mathematics of survival. Take in enough energy to persist and wait for the crisis to pass, and it does pass. Eventually the dust settles. Sunlight begins to filter through again. Plants recover, slowly at first, then with increasing vigour. The rivers and swamps fed by rain and runoff maintain their cycles. Life returns to the wetlands, and with it, the food chains rebuild. Our patient hunters emerge from their long wait, thin perhaps, depleted certainly, but alive, still here, still fundamentally unchanged. The world above has transformed. The age of giant dinosaurs is over. New creatures will evolve to fill the empty spaces. Eventually mammals will rise to prominence. Birds will diversify into thousands of forms. The whole character of life on land will shift dramatically. But down in the swamps, the same ancient pattern continues. Alligators and crocodiles and their close relatives persist in their wetland niches, still hunting the same way, still waiting with the same patience, still built along the same basic lines that served them so well for so long. Time accelerates now in our imagining, flowing faster as we watch the long ages pass. Continents drift across the face of the earth like slow-moving ships on an ocean of molten rock. What was once connected breaks apart. What was once separate collides and fuses. Mountains rise where tectonic plates crumple together. Seas flood low areas and then retreat again as ice ages lock up vast quantities of water in polar caps. Climates warm and cool in great cycles, driven by the Earth's tilt and orbit, by volcanic activity, by the changing configuration of land and sea. Through all of this, wetlands keep reappearing. They may shift location. A swamp in what is now North America may drain as the land rises, while new swamps form in what will become South America or Asia. Rivers change course, lakes appear and disappear. But the basic habitat remains available somewhere, always, because water flows downhill and collects in low places, because rain falls and creates marshes, because coastlines generate estuaries and deltas where fresh water meets salt. And wherever these wetlands appear, alligators and their relatives find them. They move with the water, following river systems, swimming along coastlines, spreading into new suitable habitat when climate permits. When ice ages advance and temperatures drop, they retreat toward the equator, toward regions that stay warm enough for their cold-blooded bodies to function. When the ice retreats and warmth returns, they spread again, moving back into higher latitudes, recolonizing rivers and swamps that have been frozen for thousands of years. Their strategy never changes. Stay close to water, bask when it's warm, shelter when it's cold, waste as little energy as possible. Imagine it like a slow, looping dance, movement without hurry, expansion and contraction in rhythm with the Earth's climate cycles. In your mind's eye, picture an alligator floating in a warm river, sunlight on its back. The seasons turn, the years pass, and it's a different alligator now, same species but generations later, basking on the same riverbank. More time passes, the river shifts course slightly, and another alligator digs a burrow in the mud during a dry season. A simple hole where it will wait out the drought, breathing slowly, hardly moving, until the rains return. Still more time, and we see alligators floating under mats of aquatic plants concealed in green shadows waiting for prey. Over and over, the same small repeatable behaviours, sunning on banks, drifting in shallows, sliding into deeper water, digging simple burrows, floating, waiting, resting. Each behaviour is performed with minimal effort. Each adaptation is just enough and no more than necessary. The body plan remains remarkably stable because it works, because it needs no improvement, because evolution is not a march toward complexity, but a process of fitting organisms to their environments. And if a fit is good enough, if it allows survival and reproduction generation after generation, why change it? Let us return now to our modern alligator, still floating in the warm southern swamp, and compare it with those ancient relatives we visited in the distant past. The same basic armour covers the body, thick, ossified scales called scutes that protect the back and sides. The same paddle-like tail extends behind, capable of propelling the animal through water with powerful sweeps or delivering devastating blows to prey and rivals. The same broad snout houses ranks of conical teeth designed not for chewing but for gripping and holding. The same positioning of eyes and nostrils allows surface breathing and surveillance, while the body remains submerged. This is what scientists call a conserved design, a body plan that evolution has, maintained with only minor modifications over enormous spans of time. It's not that these animals haven't evolved at all. Their DNA has changed, new species have emerged, some lineages have gone extinct, but the fundamental architecture, the basic blueprint, remains recognizable across tens of millions of years because it represents a solution that works, and works well, and keeps working in the environments where these animals live. Consider the jaws. They can close with enormous force, enough to crush bone, powered by massive muscles that make up a significant portion of the animal's skull. Tests have measured bite forces of thousands of pounds per square inch, among the strongest of any living animal, and yet these jaws spend most of their time doing nothing. They remain still, relaxed, slightly open perhaps to help regulate temperature, but not clamping, not crushing. The power is there, coiled and ready, but it's used sparingly, deployed only when necessary. A perfect example of the alligator's overall strategy: possess overwhelming capability but exercise patient restraint. Or think about the muscles that drive the tail. They can contract with explosive force, propelling the animal forward in a sudden lunge or allowing it to leap partially out of the water. But most of the time, they're almost completely relaxed. The alligator floats, drifts, lets currents carry it, barely twitching its tail to make small adjustments in position. It can explode into motion, but it chooses not to, saving that capability for the moments when action truly matters. Even the respiratory and circulatory systems show this pattern. The lungs can hold enough air to keep the animal submerged for extended periods, and the heart can slow dramatically underwater, reducing oxygen consumption to minimal levels. Blood flow is redirected away from less essential organs, concentrated where it's needed most. The whole body becomes a study in efficiency, in doing more with less, in maintaining function while expending minimal energy. This is how you survive for tens of millions of years. Not through constant innovation, not through arms races with predators or prey, but through having a simple, robust strategy that keeps working. Find a niche, fill it well, and don't waste energy on anything that doesn't serve survival and reproduction. Be the rock in the stream, the constant presence while everything else changes around you. The night deepens in our imagined swamp, and it's time to follow our alligator through its evening routine. The moon has climbed higher now, and its light penetrates the mist in soft, diffuse beams. The alligator begins to move, almost imperceptibly at first. A slight shift in the angle of its body, a gentle sweep of the tail. It drifts away from the bank, moving into slightly deeper water, floating low with eyes and nostrils still breaking the surface. It moves along the bank without hurry, covering perhaps a dozen yards in as many minutes. To any observer, it might appear to be drifting randomly, pushed by gentle currents. But there's purpose here. The alligator is checking its territory, moving through familiar hunting grounds, using senses we can barely imagine. It can feel vibrations through the water, the tiniest ripples created by moving fish or wading birds. Specialized sensors in its scales detect pressure changes. Its eyes, adapted for low light, pick up movement even in near-complete darkness. And its sense of smell, both in air and in water, tells it what creatures are near, what might be wounded or weak. Small fish are present. We can imagine them if we look carefully. Flickers of silver in the moonlight, schools moving together through the shallows. Birds too, night herons perhaps, stalking through the reeds on long legs, hunting the same fish the alligator hunts but from above. Mammals visit the water's edge, raccoons washing food, opossums drinking, possibly a deer stepping carefully down the bank. Most of them never notice the alligator. It's too still, too patient, too perfectly camouflaged as just another dark shape in a dark swamp. Then, a slight change. The alligator stops drifting. Its body becomes absolutely motionless, even its eyes seeming to fix on a single point. Something has moved within range. We won't specify exactly what, but something living, something unwary. The alligator waits. Seconds pass, more seconds. The prey moves slightly closer, perhaps entering the water, perhaps just lingering at the edge, and then, in a moment so brief it's almost impossible to follow, the alligator moves. There's a sudden explosion of motion, tail thrashing, jaws opening, the whole body surging forward. Water erupts in a white splash. A swirl forms where still surface existed just a heartbeat before, and then, almost as quickly as it began, the violence stops. The water settles. Ripples spread outward in expanding circles. The alligator is there again, floating low, something now held firmly in its jaws. It does not thrash or fight. It simply holds, letting the grip of those powerful jaws do their work, waiting with the same patience it brought to the hunt. After a moment, it tilts its head back and swallows, the meal going down with a few jerks of the neck, and just like that, it's done. One strike, one meal, enough to sustain the animal for days or even a week depending on the size of the prey. This is energy efficiency at its finest. Move rarely, but when you move, make it count. Don't chase, don't pursue. Let the prey come to you, then execute with overwhelming force and precision. The alligator sinks slightly now, adjusting the air in its lungs, allowing itself to become less buoyant. It descends until only the very top of its head remains above water, eyes like two small islands, nostrils like tiny periscopes. It might stay this way for the rest of the night, digesting slowly, watching the swamp, waiting to see if another opportunity presents itself. Or it might sink further, dropping below the surface entirely, hovering in the dark water like a slow-moving log suspended between surface and bottom. Alligators can hold their breath for hours when resting, their metabolism so slow that oxygen needs are minimal. Everything about this routine speaks of efficiency, of energy thrift, of not wasting motion or effort on anything that doesn't serve survival. And this routine, carried out night after night, season after season, year after year, is essentially the same routine its ancestors performed in prehistoric swamps millions of years ago. The details differ: different prey species, slightly different water chemistry, modern pollutants that weren't present before, but the pattern remains unchanged. Wait, watch, strike when the moment is right, then return to waiting. Now let us gently introduce a new element to our swamp scene. In the distance we can hear the faint sound of a boat motor, distant but approaching. Lights appear, sweeping across the water, a small fishing boat perhaps, or wildlife observers out to see the nocturnal animals. The alligator notes this but doesn't flee. Humans have become a familiar presence in many of these wetlands, and alligators have learned over generations how to coexist with them. There was a time, not so long ago in the scale we've been considering, when humans hunted alligators heavily. Their skins were valuable, their meat considered a delicacy by some, and they were killed in enormous numbers. Populations crashed. In some areas, alligators nearly disappeared entirely. But then humans did something that many species would find surprising. They changed course. Laws were passed protecting alligators. Wetlands were designated as conservation areas. Education programs taught people about the importance of these animals in their ecosystems, about how alligators create and maintain habitat that benefits dozens of other species, about how their presence indicates a healthy wetland, and so, in many places, alligators recovered. Their populations grew back towards sustainable levels. They reclaimed rivers and swamps they'd been driven from. They became, in an odd way, symbols of successful conservation, proof that humans could recognize a mistake and work to correct it. Of course, this relationship isn't simple. There are still conflicts, still occasional dangerous encounters, still debates about how to manage human development near alligator habitat. But in general, where wetlands are preserved, where water quality is maintained, where hunting is carefully regulated, alligators continue their ancient patterns almost unchanged. The boat passes, its lights sweeping across the water one more time, and then it's gone, the sound of its motor fading into the distance. The swamp settles back into its nighttime rhythms. Our alligator hasn't moved. It remains low in the water, patient as stone, unbothered by the brief intrusion. This too is part of its resilience, the ability to tolerate change, to coexist with new elements in the environment as long as the fundamental requirements are met. Water, warmth, food, places to bask and shelter. In this way, alligators have become survivors not just of natural climate swings and asteroid impacts, but also of the modern age with its cities and farms and highways. They've adapted without changing, persisted without transforming, simply by being what they've always been. Patient, efficient, robust enough to handle disturbance as long as their core habitat remains intact. As we near the end of our journey, imagine the perspective slowly pulling back. We rise above the water, looking down at the alligator resting almost fully submerged now, only its eyes and nostrils visible above the surface. The eastern sky is just beginning to lighten, not with full dawn yet, but with that first subtle shift from black to deep blue that tells of sunrise approaching. The mist over the water grows slightly thicker as the air cools in these last hours before morning. The sounds of the swamp continue unchanged. Crickets, frogs, the soft rustle of reeds, water lapping gently at muddy banks. From this height we can see the whole swamp spread out below, A patchwork of water and land, of trees and open channels, of places where the boundary between solid and liquid blurs into something in between. And we can imagine, if we look with different eyes, all the layers of time beneath this moment. The dinosaur age swamps that once covered this same region. The cold periods when ice advanced and alligators retreated south. The warm intervals when they returned. The asteroid winter they endured. The millions upon millions of years of patient hunting, of lying in wait, of surviving through sheer efficiency and robust design. This creature floating below us, so still it seems almost part of the water itself, is a living link to all those vanished times. Not a relic or a leftover, but a successful design that continues to work, continues to fill its ecological role, continues to do what it has always done. While the world changed around it, while continents drifted and mountains rose, while ice ages came and went, while humans appeared and built civilizations, the alligator simply kept being an alligator. Kept waiting, kept watching, kept surviving with minimal waste and maximum patience. There is something profound in this, something worth contemplating as we allow ourselves to drift towards sleep. In a world that often celebrates speed and constant activity, constant innovation and change, here is a creature that succeeds through slowness, through conservation of energy, through knowing when to move and when to be absolutely still, through the wisdom of waiting. Let yourself mirror that now if you can. Settle deeper into whatever supports you. Allow your breathing to slow, to find its own rhythm like the gentle rise and fall of the alligator in the water. Feel your body becoming heavier, more relaxed, energy conserving itself for tomorrow. There's nothing you need to do right now, nothing you need to accomplish. You can simply float, like our ancient hunter floating in the warm swamp water, held up by forces you don't have to think about, breathing without effort, resting without worry. The alligator's eyes are closing now, or perhaps just becoming hooded, the nictitating membranes sliding across to protect them while still allowing some awareness of the surroundings. The great tail lies still. The armoured body barely moves with breathing. In this state of deep rest, the alligator will remain for hours, conserving energy, digesting its meal, waiting for the day to warm enough for basking. It has no anxiety about the future, no regrets about the past. It simply exists in this moment, perfectly suited to its environment, descended from a line of survivors stretching back further than human civilization, further than human existence, further than the age of mammals. Water laps gently at the bank, the reeds sway with the smallest breeze. Somewhere in the distance a night heron calls once, then falls silent. The mist continues its slow drift across the surface, curling and uncurling in patterns that never quite repeat. Everything here is slow, everything here is patient. And if you're still awake, still listening, know that this ancient patient hunter will continue its quiet watch while you drift away. It will be here when morning comes, still floating, still waiting, still carrying forward a pattern of existence that has outlasted almost everything else that ever lived. The swamp will be here tomorrow night, and the night after, and for thousands of nights to come. The alligator, or its children, or its children's children, will lie in these same waters, watching with those same ancient eyes, breathing at the surface with those perfectly positioned nostrils, surviving through patience and efficiency, and the simple wisdom of doing what works, what has always worked, what will continue to work as long as there is water and warmth and time. Let that image carry you now. The still water, the patient hunter, the soft sounds of the swamp at night, the weight of all those years, all that survival, all that quiet endurance. You're floating too now, held up by your own rest, your own stillness. Nothing to do but breathe and settle and allow sleep to come in its own time, like everything in the swamp, without hurry, without force, gentle and inevitable as the turning of the earth toward dawn. The alligator floats, you float. The swamp breathes softly around you both, and somewhere in the darkness, in the warm, humid night, the ancient pattern continues, unchanged and unchanging, patient as stone, patient as water, patient as the slow turning of millions of years. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy.